And welcome to the Evidence and Reasons for the Christian Faith video channel. I'm Salvador Cordova. There is a little bit of a feedback on Cindy's microphone, and that's hopefully we'll deal with it. So anyway, we're privileged to be joined by the star of the show, Cindy Lincoln here. We have had, let me look how many views our show had, that debate we had on modern day debate. Cindy, why don't you introduce yourself while I'm trying to start this up, and we're going to have a prayer for a lot of things today after you introduce myself and we settle down. So go ahead, tell everyone who you are.
I'm Cindy Lincoln. Sal and I met when he came chivalrously to my defense about Ken Oven, his terrible abuse. When
Kent's, not mine.
Yes. And I was first introduced to creationism about 5 years after I got saved in 1989 by Henry Morris. Ken Ham was still with ICR at that time. Steve Austin, Dwayne Gish. It was a week-long seminar, so I got to basically see all of them. Vardama, that astronomy guy, I forget, Jason Lyle. And I have been absolutely enthralled with the creation message ever since. Creation is one of the ways that I got saved, because I saw the beauty of God's creation. I knew there was a creator. I knew that we were the ones that messed it up. But I wondered why he never talked. And so when I found out that he did talk, he came to earth in the person of Jesus Christ, I was just ecstatic, and I have been ecstatic about Jesus ever since, and the creation message. I think that's how he shows his glory and love for us, by the beauty of the things that he made, and just the magnificence of what he made.
People in the side chat, let me know if the audio levels are balanced. If one of us is too, the volume needs to be increased on one versus the other. Hopefully you can hear us okay. And Gangster Mark O'Connell, God bless you. Thank you for joining us. And Gangster Ghost, nice to see you. We're on the brink of a big election tomorrow.
Yeah.
And let me read something that says in 1 Timothy, and then we'll get down to business. But glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We dedicate the stream to him. And sometimes it can be kind of irreverent in our streams, and I have something irreverent to share that I was praising the Lord for. But anyway, first item of business. Robert Beatty says, Hi, Cindy. Hi, Sal. Cindy, still no word from my super secret source. Okay,
Thank you, Robert.
There you go.
Hi, Mr. Beatty.
Yes, thank you, Robert. So it says in 1 Timothy, first of all, then, I urge that supplications, prayers, intercessions, and thanksgivings be made for all people, for kings and all who are in high positions, that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. This is good, and it is pleasing in the sight of God, our Savior. Cindy, if I can occasionally mute you when I'm talking, it'll cut down on the feedback. And then I'll unmute you every now and then.
I'm intentionally on my laptop because we had feedback on my phone last time, so I'm surprised about that. I have ceiling fans going. I don't know if that would do it.
No one really knows, so don't worry about it. I'll help. So, yep. So let me offer some prayers. Dear Heavenly Father, we lift up our nation, the United States of America. We're on the brink of an election, and there are people running for office that hate you, Lord, that describe Christians in the most horrible ways. And we ask, they reject Christian values. And Lord, you've commanded us to pray that that we may lead a peaceful and quiet life, godly and dignified in every way. And yet, Lord, we know that the world will end one day, and things could get really bad. And one day, this prayer won't be answered, but you have commanded us to pray, so we will pray, Father. And we pray that the voters will elect righteous leaders, that the process would have integrity of voting, that there wouldn't be cheating that would be the cause to put people in office who shouldn't be there. And dear Lord, there are needs among those in the side chat, and Cindi has needs, I have needs, and people in the side chat have needs. We lift up the Christian brothers and sisters watching this channel in particular. I lift up the Christians who are in Iran, or who are from Iran, who are fleeing persecution and suffering persecution. May that country be a Christian nation. I know that's a lot to ask, but Christianity is growing in the place we would have least expected, as it just to parallel what it had said in your word, in the valley of darkness, a great light had shone. And Lord, I pray for the Christians all around the world, and give us this day our daily bread, Lord. We have needs, and I'll just leave it at that. Thank you for everyone that are of our family, the Christian family that are watching this. Let us be a blessing to them. In Jesus' name, amen.
See that you are their maker. Amen.
Amen. Okay. So, Aron Ra, it probably was provident that Cindi was my partner. Aron Ra said some unflattering things about my other partner. In fact, I had a quote of what he said about her, and someone's been tracking. I mean, this isn't really a particularly big channel, but someone's been tracking all the drama that's going on this channel, so that's kind of fun. But Aron talked about Rebecca, so someone was tracking all the drama that was surrounding her, and then all the drama afterward. And so this is what Aron said of Rebecca. And if you forgive me, this is taking a little time to load. He said, I knew of his partner, that is Rebecca. It was someone who posted demonstrably factually false claims on YouTube while pretending to be a truth seeker. Yet she said it was a colossal waste of time to hear me point out any of the many things she got wrong. She certainly wasn't going to admit or correct any of those many errors. Or something like that. All right. So I may or may not provide a link to that video. I haven't watched it. I mean, just took a swipe at Rebecca. She's like the sweetest person. So then, so everyone knows that Rebecca was going to be she was my dream tag team partner, and that fell through for a number of reasons. And I haven't gotten the story exactly right. She keeps saying, Sal, that wasn't quite right what you said. And I'm like, okay, I'm sorry. Let me try again, and I'll get a little closer. So I'm just going to leave it that we weren't able to do this debate, because each version of the story I get wrong, and she lets me have it. And so I've invited her to come back. She has declined, and I'm actually happy for her that she's out of YouTube and not dealing with all the hostility. This is a toxic environment. But why did I bring that up? I said, well, then I was scrambling to get a pool of people, and I had about 6 people lined up, and Cindi Lincoln won the competition. She won the competition, and there's
it's only for my coattails, isn't it? I know.
I know. See, I'm never gonna pull the wool over your eyes. Yeah, Cindy's star power just kind of, her star power. So okay, so I'm not gonna pull the wool over Cindi here. So it was provident because Cindy's kind of very sweet and people want to talk to her. And James just kind of did an email to connect all of us with an email. Cindi kept responding to that email, kept copying everyone. And Aron offered to explain evolution to her. Some of us feel that the evolutionary community would like to see Cindi flip now that she left. I'm sorry, not get kicked out. She escaped. She escaped the prison of Dinosaur Adventureland in Kent Hovind, and all that oppression and all the manipulation and lies. They figured, well, we can flip her. She's done with creationists, and Aron was surprisingly nice to Cindi. Everyone noticed that, and he still is. I'd like to think that he has truly kind motives for her, not that he's going to just hold her up as a trophy. I do know, sincerely, I believe there are some who are evolutionists that really think, oh, poor Cindi, she's been lied to. We need to set her straight on the science. So whatever, I'm not going to try to psychoanalyze someone's motives. I just, I speculated, maybe I went over the top by speculating that they're trying to just flip you. But in any case, that generated an email stream that's going back and back and forth. And the latest
phylogenetic challenged, Sal.
Yeah. And then, of course, there's also another dynamic here. Cindi and I keep fighting over, she'll say something like, no, oh, don't say that. Don't say that. You're going to be an ambassador for creationism. Don't say that. If you weren't who you were, I'd let it go. I mean, if you're standing in poop, it's like I'll let standing in poop say whatever he wants to. But you're Cindi Lincoln, and I'm trying to hold you to different standards. So, and so we have some.
I have to say, if you're going to say that I embarrass you with some of my arguments, which I will concede, I'm open to discussion. But I get to say also that you embarrassed me when you were raising your voice and you didn't keep your loving demeanor.
I'm sorry.
I still love you.
Well, thank you. I still love you too. So, all right. See, we're disagreeing here. That's good. And I want Cindi to stand up. I told her last night, I want you to stand up to me. I don't like people running over you, and I want you to speak for yourself. And I'm happy when you disagree with me and you say, no, Sal, I'm not going to do that. I'm thrilled because I feel that some people have taken advantage of you, and I like you being a little bit more assertive and saying, when you deal with so-and-so, it's like, no, I don't think that's right. And, even if I'm wrong, this is the way I think right now that I should do things, and this is the right way to go. So that's all cool. So this was going back and forth. And so Aron was trying to getting these long, oh my goodness, these long emails trying to teach Cindi and say, okay, Cindi, do you agree with this or that? And, because I, I heard Aron in his debate with Fuzz Rana say, I've tried to give this to so many creationists and they never do it. But I guarantee you, if you go through it, you'll be an evolutionist. And he said, one of the first people that did this, she changed her mind. She ended up becoming my wife.
I think he said she was the only one who took it.
Yeah. Okay. So Mrs. Raw became Mrs. Raw because he was just so charming and persuasive, and just walked her through his evolution thing. Now, the last time Cindi was on the channel, we were going through it, and one of his first points, we spent 2 hours on like one paragraph, and we couldn't quite agree on how to deal with this. So this has gone back and forth. Of late, let me see. I'm sorry, we're normally a family-friendly channel. But he said, so I'm going to show here the email. I got Aron and Dr. Chris and Cindy's permission to share this. So in the red is what Aron is saying. He said, it's frustrating for me, because he's writing to Cindi. He said, but he's CCing me also and Chris. He said, it's frustrating for me that you have hours to waste listening to idiots lie to you. Idiots being me. So I'm a lying idiot. Okay. It's frustrating for me that you have hours to waste listening to idiots lie to you, but you can hardly spare a moment for someone who can prove they're telling the truth.
What is he talking about? I spent flipping 5 hours responding to him.
Okay.
I spent less than that with you. And I listened to the 3-hour debate twice.
Okay.
3 times.
All right. So this is the larger email that I sent to Aron recently. And so you'll see the red where I'm quoting him or someone else. Okay. So he said, so I say, from Sal, Cindi, this is a teachable moment. And I'll show you how the other side can't even state my argument accurately. And so what did the other side say? So let me give a little backstory here. Aron had gotten contacted by other biologists to deal with me. And now he's relaying what they said about me. So this is their criticism of me. Sal is going on and on about this stupid protein orchard argument. So in the debate, we had this, let me see, we had a picture here that we call the protein orchard. So let me explain the protein orchard argument.
Which, by the way, he conceded was indeed an orchard and need not have a common ancestor.
Exactly. There was a beautiful way it was said. And Robert Beatty says here, I read something recently by Lilandra Raw where she indicated that it is just her staged name, that she did not join her husband in legally changing her name, changing her name. Of course, Robert would figure stuff out like that. He's good. So in the debate, we showed this protein orchard. And so we were saying, all right, let's accept for the sake of except for the sake of argument that life proceeds, that there is universal common descent. The earth is old, universal common descent. So they thought we were going to do something about Noah's flood. See, I knew that would throw them for a loop. That we would say, let's just assume this for the sake of argument. And so I had a photograph from the Smithsonian. I just happened to have been there this summer, took a picture of this tree of life of Darwin. The bottom is the primordial, the cell that diversifies into everything. And so let's just
unnamed universal common ancestor.
The
unnamed, unknown, unseen by faith.
Universal common ancestor.
Thank you.
But I said the problem is, what about the proteins? The proteins have independent origins. So this is the protein argument, and I wanted to elaborate on it more. And, it's so hard to do this in a short debate format. But, so let's clarify. We did put out this orchard. And so what was my argument? First off, all I said is there's not a universal, the first thing we said, there's no universal common ancestor for all proteins.
Can I just say, for anybody who doesn't know, the reason he can say that, if you don't know what you're looking at, is each of those molecular configurations that are shown, like one looks like a fence, one looks like a star, one looks like, they are so unique and different, and they are composed of different molecules that they couldn't possibly share a common ancestor.
Common ancestor. Exactly. And another way to look at it, all right, so we can kind of, and I didn't have this in the debate because we were short of time, but this was the first car by Carl Benz, the Motorwagen. And modern cars kind of have the same basic, and you could see this, you have the original conceptual design, and then it diversified, but you have a lot of the same architecture. So that, that's kind of like a common descent. But what you can't do is with the parts of the car, you can't start from one part and say, let's modify it, and it's going to become a fuel tank, a tire, a piston, a spark plug, radiator, and battery. You can't reconstruct it even conceptually. Even an engineer will not be able to start with one part and then make all of these. It just doesn't make sense because these are nice integrated wholes. So comparing and contrasting, you can sort of, like say these are whole organisms, so to speak. They're analogous to whole organisms. You can kind of put them in family trees. But what I realized is when you go down to the part level, all of that tree stuff just goes out the window. I mean, you can have families of spark plugs, families of batteries, but you can't relate them with a common ancestor. You definitely see that with the parts, the protein parts of life. So just like the parts of a car don't have a common ancestor that can, that you can incrementally make all the parts of the car, likewise, you don't have a common ancestor that you can incrementally make all the parts, the protein parts of life. Do you have any comment there?
Yes. So those proteins are found in our DNA. Is that correct?
They are coded by the DNA, and we can go back there. We can revisit the central dogma. So I'm going to back up here and explain to the audience, why am I focusing so much on Dr. Joel? I never said that I expected anyone to believe all proteins came from a common ancestor. That's exactly the argument. It's unreasonable. No one accepts it. I don't. People, okay, Cindi, I won't raise my voice. I get so mad because there are lies circulating about what I believe, and that's what I'm going to try to straighten out today. And people seem to listen to the lies. They never actually listen to what I said.
Well, this is their common rhetoric. They say that nobody would expect or teach that all proteins would have a common ancestor, but they say that's their left hand, but their right hand is saying everything shares a common ancestor.
Okay.
Am I missing something?
We'll get there. But I never said, he said, sure, still not sure why you, meaning Sal, you think this is a reasonable expectation. I said, no, I never believed that.
Yeah, that's the opposite.
I never believed that. I never believed that. But they keep pinning that on me. They keep repeating that lie all over the internet. And I've never said it. I've tried to make it clear that's not what I believe.
They're trying to tick you off, Sal.
They're trying to make you.
yeah.
They're trying to make you look bad, just like Kent did to me. Let's make her scream so everybody thinks she's crazy.
Yeah. All right. So, Dr. Joel, brother in Christ, theistic evolutionary creationist. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to call you a theistic evolutionist. You're an evolutionary creationist. I think there is a distinction, and you know what that means. And he said, okay, but I've listened to what you have said many times, and I'm not sure what you're saying. Still don't understand the argument. So this is a great time to clarify it. Good time to, and he apologized, and I apologize to you, Dr. Joel, for raising my voice.
It defies the UCA, period.
Okay, what did you say, Cindi?
It defies a UCA,
Universal
common answer.
Okay, I'm not going to go quite that far, but you can see it doesn't feel good at the very start, okay? I wouldn't go quite that far, but it doesn't. I'm going to show where I was headed with this. So there is this protein orchard that was discussed. And so this is how they characterized what I said. They said, Sal is going on and on about this stupid protein orchard argument. He will not let it go. Any molecular biologist would just stare at him in shock and dismay. Whatever happened 3.5 billion years ago, where the first protocells formed, encapsulated trillions of different small peptide sequences. Proteins do not have an effing common ancestor. Sal thinks this is a big problem for evolution because he is that stupid. That this is a fallacy of composition. He thinks because organisms had a common ancestor, then all of the parts of the organism must have had a common ancestor as well. Now, if that were true, then a primordial cell would have had to function with one protein. Let me just enlarge this just so people can see.
Aren't they the ones that are saying the initial life form was an RNA?
Well, they're different theories. Okay. Sal thinks this is a big problem. Okay, but what did they concede? They said, I'm going to be on television, and this is supposed to be family friendly. If I had a museum exhibit, I wanted to quote this: proteins do not have a effing common ancestor. I want to put that in the Creation Museum, but we're supposed to be.
You'd be fired, Sal.
Huh?
You'd be fired.
Yeah. All right. For once, all of us can agree on something. Proteins do not have an effing common ancestor.
Hey, let's write that down. Common ground.
And really, this is whoever wrote Aron Ra, but Aron, I hope you don't mind if I also attribute it to you, because you obviously agree with that statement.
I think he said it, didn't he?
I don't know. Okay, so the problem is, okay, so I said some of what was said in that exchange was correct, some false. This part was correct. I wish I could put it, okay, this is what let's go back here. Some of what was said was correct, some false. This part was correct. I wish I could put it in a creationist textbook and at a creationist museum exhibit. Proteins do not have an effing common ancestor. Aron Ra. Okay, so this is the YouTube version. Proteins do not have an effing common ancestor. This part, however, misrepresented my argument, what my argument actually was. It was a straw man. He thinks because organisms had a common ancestor, then all the parts of the organisms must have had a common ancestor. No, that's not true. That is not true. That does not represent my position.
Okay, you have to explain why not, because
Okay.
I can see why he would say that.
And you know, I'll tell you why some people probably don't understand. I think some of my arguments from that subsequent just flew over their head. And this is okay, that we're going to clear this up. So I'm not going to, you know, I mean, there is someone on the internet that I kept repeating that is not the way I view this. And he doesn't get it. He's kind of dense and kind of like, well, I don't like him anyway. But he thinks, okay, so they're accusing me. So why don't I clarify my argument? You know, so first just realize this is not true. Okay. I don't believe that because an organism had a common ancestor, then all the parts of the organism must have had a common ancestor as well. There are exceptions to that. It's still problematic, okay?
But the person who said that the initial thing 3 million years ago would have incorporated multiple different peptides. And that doesn't make any sense, because where did all those multiple peptides come from? And they were just being incorporated into a membrane?
Poof! Poof! Magic!
A membrane just came and
you're getting there. You're getting there. So imagine that, let's say there's a cell, the first cell, it had all these little parts in it that had different origins. That looks, I mean, okay. You could take a cell and kind of put it in a blender, figuratively speaking, and you have all the parts. It doesn't reassemble back. So even if you had all that stuff floating in the soup, it's still a miracle that you had all those independent parts. So let's say we had a bazillion scientists making all the parts of the cell. All right. So then it has independent origins. You throw it in a soup, it's still not going to make a cell. That was the point James Tour was making toward, you know, his lectures against Dave Farina. He said, I'll give you that. I'll give you all the high quality RNAs, DNAs, all the proteins, the lipids, and the sugars. You have a parts list. I'll give you all that. You put it together. And I love these. I'll give you that. I'll give you that. You're not going to do it in that New York accent. He said, I'll give you that. So.
Yeah, because each thing that's in the cell serves a certain function to serve the whole entire cell as a unit. It's not a random amalgamation of parts. You can't just take a spark plug and a battery and stick them in a membrane and expect them to do something.
Yep. So the nice thing is, okay, this is going to cause the point I'll show you why I was making this point. You're very close, and you're starting to understand the argument. This still causes problems for them if they are willing to listen more when I was putting up the protein diagrams. If this is true, this is still very problematic for evolution. And we can go into the reasons why, but this is bad. This is not a good situation. And we'll just elaborate here, try to set the record straight.
You have to elaborate a little bit.
Okay. So I said the bolded part is a false claim about my beliefs. I know it's a false claim because I don't believe that now, nor have I ever in the past, nor have I ever said I believed it publicly. What my critics are doing is sowing a spirit of confusion. But God is not the author of confusion, 1 Corinthians 4:33. So you know that a wicked spirit is at work here, where the argument about the protein orchard is made confusing by these people making false statements about my beliefs. The bolded segment is an example of a strawman argument where they attribute an argument to me that I never made nor believed. I said the proteins would not have a common ancestor because it would be infeasible, just like expecting the parts of a car, a spark plug, piston, radiator, battery, to evolve conceptually from a common ancestral form through an engineer's incremental improvement from the starting form. And that was my picture here. This one. I said, just common sense will tell you it can't start from a common ancestor. And I'm going to finish my argument out.
And it cannot start with a random amalgamation. It
not a
cannot be
random amalgamation, and it's also very hard to make the part. That's the crux. It's very hard to make the part, and we're going to go there. So I'll just keep. Did you get to read this letter today?
No.
You know. Okay. So this is the first time you're seeing. This is great then. And I said so July 23rd, 2022 at the Creation Research Conference at Liberty University. I made a big deal about that and went on record publicly on YouTube here a few days later, where I restated everything I said. And I think the creationists understood what I was saying.
Honey, they do this regularly. They do this regularly. I can't think of an example.
Okay.
But where they attribute, where we're criticizing and saying, this is ridiculous, this can never happen, then they somehow attribute it to our belief system.
Okay.
I've seen it over and over again.
All right. So I'll give Dr. Joel, I accept what you're saying here. Some of my other critics, I'm not so patient with. So thank you for you said, Sal, I've listened to your talk about Protein Orchard many, many times. I'm not trying to misrepresent you. So the fact that I'm confused suggests that it's been hard to follow your argument. Okay.
Mm-hmm. It took me a while too, Joel.
Okay. So Aron's criticism, which proceed from the scientists he contacted, is based on a falsehood about what I believe and what I actually said. Okay. So there are people that are watching my channel a lot. And it's a little bit uncomfortable. Okay, so they're watching it. I would have expected they would have followed this. I mean, but let's just go with whatever let's just keep going with the letter. They could try to engage the real argument I'm making rather than knocking down a straw man and pretending victory. You might want to read a book on logical fallacies. So you being Cindi, because I'm writing this to Cindi. So this is my letter to you. And this is the first time you're hearing my letter to you. And this is also read by... Huh?
I didn't realize that.
Okay, yeah. So this is my, just for the audience's, the viewers' understanding, there are 4 people watching this interaction: Aron Ra, Chris Thompson, myself, and Cindi. So when I send a letter to Cindi, it's being witnessed by Aron and Chris. So they see what I'm communicating to her. So I said, so I'm writing to Cindi here, but I have in mind that Dr. Chris and Aron are watching the exchange, because I'm sort of inviting them, because he's trying to discredit me in Cindy's eyes. I'm trying to discredit them in Cindy's eyes. We're battling for your approval here. Okay.
Well, and we're kind of going through the phylogenetic challenge together.
Right, and I'm telling you, don't go through that. But we'll go there later, okay? So we'll talk about it later. So, and greetings, Bumblebee. Greetings.
Hi, Bree.
Hi, Bree. Welcome. So Aron's criticism, which proceed from the scientists he contacted, is based on a falsehood about what I believe and what I actually said. They're sowing confusion in such a spirit of confusion.
Go skip down.
What?
You already read all that. Skip down.
Oh no, I'll continue.
Okay.
They're sowing confusion, and such a spirit of confusion does not come from God. So I'm writing me to Cindi, and they're listening to what I'm saying. I've called my critics out repeatedly on their misrepresentations of me, and they persist spreading falsehoods. What sort of spirit then is in them that they would keep repeating the same falsehood about me over and over again? More reason you shouldn't trust the evolutionist industry. They could try to engage the real argument I'm making rather than knocking down a straw man and pretending victory. Okay, so I did read that. Anyway, evolutionism is built on such fallacies. You might want to read a book on logical fallacies. Evolutionism is built on such fallacies. And I'm showing you one such example. In any case, they made a pretty good admissions. Proteins do not have a effing common ancestor.
Scroll down, Sal. Come on now.
All right. It might be irreverent to say praise the Lord after hearing such an admission from evolutionists, but I felt like saying praise the Lord on seeing that. So when I saw this, I said praise the Lord. Okay. The problem is that there is no gradual descent with modification of an arbitrary protein/DNA sequence into the would-be ancestral protein gene sequence that becomes the founding ancestor of a major protein family like those we highlighted in our debate. Now, this is kind of complicated, but this is what I say.
That's very complicated.
Okay. The first problem is a random DNA sequence would have stop codons every 22 or so codons on average, but I digress. So why don't I back this up for you so you can understand? All right. So why don't I show you the spelling of a mature protein here? Maybe I can, let's see, we can zoom this in.
Those are all ACTGs, right? No, there's
No,
more
these are
than
proteins. Okay, so let's walk you through the central dogma. It's been about a month since we talked about the central dogma of molecular biology, and so let me just bring that up. Do you remember the central dogma?
No.
Okay. We'll try to get you. Okay. All right. So no, this is good, and the more practice you have at repeating certain creationist arguments, the more it will be, it'll flow. And we have a biology student here in Paleologos, right here.
Hi,
He's a
Peter.
freshman in biology. He's a Christian. He's a creationist, and he's in biology. And you see he's only a freshman. Do you see the kind of language he's using? He said ATP is required to break down glucose, but the next portion of the process, the dephosphorylation of G3P made from the glucose to create ATP does not. So there you go.
Wait, ATP is required. Thanks, Sal. I was going to try and put the subject and the verb together without all the in-between so I could understand what the heck he's trying to say. ATP is required to break down glucose, but the next portion of the process does not? That doesn't make sense to me. Peter, English, please. And what does this have to do with our subject matter?
No, I was just pointing out what it has to do is I'm saying, see, even a freshman, but he's a first semester freshman in biology. Granted, he's had some biology training, but I'm just trying to communicate to you as you wanted to be a creationist missionary. You talk to high school kids, it's only a few years they're going to be starting to face college classes like this. It'll be comforting to them that you kind of understand the language. They'll come back to you as a resource. And then now that you're in touch with the creationist community, if you have a question you can't answer, you have a whole pool of people that can help you and you can connect. But see, now what we don't want is we use an argument and then they feel like Cindi doesn't know what she's talking about. I'm not ever going to go back to her. So if you can learn the central dogma, this is going to be a big step for you. So the central dogma, and so let's just show a picture. The easiest way to show the central dogma. There are a variety of diagrams. Some are more accurate than others. So, okay. And Peter says,
hi, Peter.
Says, I'll reach back out to set up a new time for us to talk.
Thank you. Please do.
Okay. So do you see this?
Yes.
Sorry?
Yes.
All right, I'll make it bigger.
Actually, I can go into major screen. Okay, there we go.
Now, why don't I just show a picture of a cell? So what are the two major classes of cells? Eukaryotes and
Prokaryotes.
very good. So might as well just take one where we have the both pictured here.
And ne'er the twain shall meet.
Correct.
They also don't share a common ancestor.
Oh, it was funny. Aron said, well, evolution doesn't really cover that.
Well, he introduced a concept that I had not been familiar with before. He called it something horizontal.
Gene transfer. Okay.
Where it was not ancestral.
Okay. So I'm looking for something with a big, okay, this has a bigger picture here. So we'll go here. So this is a eukaryotic cell. And in here we have DNA. And then the DNA gets, go back to the central picture. So the DNA inside this, okay, so I showed you it's kind of in the quote unquote middle of the cell. It's really the nucleus for a eukaryotic cell. So you have chromosomes. The chromosomes are made of chromatin. Chromatin is made of DNA and histones, but the DNA there, and the DNA can get transcribed to RNA. DNA transcribed to RNA, and then the RNA gets translated to a protein. So what's the alphabet of DNA?
ACTG. Don't ask me what they stand for.
You remember the little kid singing?
Arginine or
no,
arginine.
no, you're, I'll help you. A is for adenine, A is for adenine, C is for cytosine, G is for guanine, T is for thymine. Now I know my ABCs. Next time won't you sing with me?
I can't do that.
And I showed this on my channel for a reason. There's a little 4-year-old kid, so I was trying to teach them the DNA alphabet. And kids are just like sponges. And so I just say, A is for adenine. And they just started repeating it. So a little 4-year-old kid saying, A is for adenine. And so I said, let's go play Frisbee. And we went outside and he was saying, A is for adenine. A is for adenine. Okay. But that's just all to kind of just set you at ease that this is just, some of it's just really rote memory. And when you keep going through it enough, you start to remember it just like people's names. The problem is when you're taking biochemistry, it's like learning a phone book. They throw so many things at you that you have to memorize. And they're all these names. It's just like learning a phone book. So A is for adenine, C is for cytosine, G is for guanine, T is for thymine. Now I know my ABCs. Next time, won't you sing with me? And I actually remember it better as a song. So you could hear me actually going through that. So you got the DNA alphabet correct. And so the central dogma is, one way to describe it's the flow of information. So you see DNA, the information in DNA goes to RNA, and the information in RNA goes to protein. There's one exception here.
So what?
DNA is like a blueprint. Blueprint?
But the DNA is untwisting, and you're only getting one strand in the RNA.
Correct.
Except for the U popped out of nowhere.
Right. So if you have a T, it gets transcribed to a U. That's just a chemical thing. So it goes from T to U.
In the unwind process.
In the transcription process. So first it unwinds and then separates the strands. Now you're remembering the video that I showed you on that, and that's why you know it, because we actually watched the video together of the process. When you watch it a few times, it'll start to stick. So it just takes some repetition.
So first it unwinds, then it's going to create a duplicate of itself, but the duplicate is not quite exact because RNA has some differences.
Hang on, Bree. I'm going to give you rights. One moment. Let me see. Okay, Bree, go ahead.
Wait, I have to go get a glass of wine.
Paleologo said, laugh out loud. SFT took down his video of Kent Hovind saying that Dr. Wood is wrong about the horse sequence. Oops.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, so
Paleo, you still watch Kent Hovind? Oh man, I feel sorry for you. I can't stand it.
Okay, so you're going to get to meet. Okay, so Bree, you're a mod now. Bree, you're a mod. Let me see. Actually, Bumblebee. Hang on. Bumblebee, you're a mod. Okay.
Use your authority wisely, Bree.
Okay, so let's go back to your question here. So DNA, and you vaguely remember the process. The videos, all the machinery that has to do this is incredible. We had these things called polymerases and other things. And it transcribes the DNA. So the DNA is like a blueprint for the protein. It does have an intermediate stage that's RNA. So the central dogma will talk about RNA, but if it is correct to say DNA serves as a blueprint for a protein. Do you see how this works? This is the blueprint, and this is the final product. And that's what we call the genetic code. I mean, the way it maps is the genetic code. I like the DNA version. I don't like the RNA version. It's just easier for me to think about it that way.
So I thought the transcription process was a duplication process, kind of like cell division.
Okay, in cell division, you have a replication process. It's called replication.
But I thought the transcription process was a replication process because DNA
It is.
itself.
It is not a replication process. It is a transcription. That means the reason they. I think someone who came up with the words was actually kind of smart to describe it. So they use the word replication to mean duplication. It really is. Replication is the right word. When the cell is dividing and making copies of itself, it has to make duplicates. They use the word replication instead of duplication. But that's duplicating the entire DNA, the entire genome. That's the replication process.
Which is millions of those letters.
Yeah, in humans, it's billions, 3.3 gigabases. So there is some problem with copy fidelity. We don't need to go there, but for the most part, it's identical in almost every cell. Almost, not quite every cell. So replication, just think duplication. Transcription is just like if you were if you're transcribing shorthand. I don't know if you remember the old days of shorthand.
Okay, so you're taking a symbol and you're making it into its real thing.
Into another symbol. They use the word transcription. Going from DNA to RNA is a transcription process. And it's basically, and I showed you the molecules here.
So it's basically executing the code to create a protein according to the instructions.
Central dogma, yeah. Correct. So let's see. We have R. Let me see if I could show you nucleotide.
Because James Tour was talking a little bit about how DNA is kind of like a carrier of the instruction, but the instructions are actually separate.
You can look at it that way. We can also look at it at the chemical level. So I had this nucleotide. I'm looking for a diagram for us, just kind of give you what's going on. Let's see if some pictures are better than others, unfortunately.
So what exactly are the proteins that are being created in this process?
Okay, so we'll get there. We'll get there. This is why I was saying it'd be worth your time to just kind of learn all of this from the ground up. And once you can speak this language, it'll stick with you. You won't forget it. So the RNA is made of these ribonucleotides. And you can see if you just compare the picture here to the deoxyribose, you'll see that in the ribose, it has this O. And in this,
It's the same except for the oxygen, which is why they call it a deoxyribose.
exactly. You remember it even from a month ago. That's why it's called a
listening to James' tour.
Exactly. There
And
you
he
go.
said that riboses are sugars.
Yeah, very hard. And so you have the base here. This base is where you get the adenine, the ACTG. But in the case of, okay, in DNA it's ACTG, but in the case of ribose, it's ACUG, the U being uracil. So when we go through the transcription process and
The T becomes a U.
Correct. And then you go through this translation process, and that's why I wanted to show you the genetic code. And I'll show you what the genetic code looks like. So you have to have 3 DNA letters. When you have 3 DNA letters, that's a codon. They just call that a codon. When you have a grouping of 3, the 3 gets translated into 1 amino acid. And the word is translated. So let's just go back to this diagram here.
And what do amino acids do in our body?
Okay, they make the proteins, and I'll show you that. So we have this. Let me get this. Let me get rid of this here.
What do the proteins do in our body?
Okay, they are the things that are very good to make machines, and also other things.
Basically, they're the raw material to create all of our body parts.
A lot of them. I wouldn't say that because you have sugars and lipids. So I'm glad you're asking these questions. I'll give it to you in context. So if we could just focus on this here in the meantime. Let me try to get all this lined up for you. So I'm going to have to shrink this, see if I could shrink it. Lord help me. All right. So you have a DNA, and every 3 letters you can group together to make a codon, what they call a codon. And there's a very special process where it translates 3 DNA letters into 1 amino acid. So it's and there are 20 canonical amino acids. There are actually more than that, but the canonical ones that are coded they're 20. So you have, and they go by names like phenylalanine, leucine, isoleucine, methionine, valine, serine,
When I was taking a protein shake, they bragged that it had all 21 amino acids.
So there's selenocysteine or something. So that's great. We have a lot of biology people here. So, and there's this thing called a stop codon. That's very important. It's a punctuation mark. So, and I'll cover that. So you could see here, then you have 3 letters of DNA that will correspond to an amino acid. So when you have the 3 letters, you have this long string of DNA, but you break it up into groups of 3. And you can make amino acids. And then the amino acids, then, when you spell it out, can look like this. So
there's 21 of those letters, MFS. There's 21 different letters for 21 different amino acids.
Yes, I think it's 22, but the canonical ones that are coded are 20. Think about 20. Think the number 20.
Okay. I'll get my
21,
protein
there
powder.
are 22, there are 22 amino acids, and then some other strange ones like putrescine and cadaverine that kind of, yeah, it smells really bad. When something's dead, you get
I
lots of
was going to
putrescine.
say cadaver and
Yes.
putrid.
Yeah. So there are amino acids that will spontaneously form outside of the DNA process, like in a dead creature. It's putrescine and cadaverine. It smells horrible. So there's a reason they called it that. So
Wow. So when you die, your body automatically starts creating these decomposition enzymes.
These decomposed amino acids, putrescine and cadaverine. But then, so those aren't, I don't,
Wow.
Yeah. There are two other ones, selenocysteine and another one that do have some known biological function. So, okay, so now if you can imagine, hang on, let me get this diagram back up. If you can imagine that you have DNA, to code an M, let's just look at the genetic code table. So for methionine, you need ATG. I should have remembered that. I've seen that so many times. So if the DNA sequence starts with ATG, it generates an M.
Oh my gosh. So you've got all those characters, and each of those characters represents 3 characters. You've got a whole lot of flipping information. And one change in one letter is a big deal.
Yeah, it can be. And I hope you're starting to see why I'm emphasizing the cellular level. And I meant to say this earlier. What really motivated me to say, let's explore the cellular level was the case of Matt Bilyeu. He was on Rebecca Davis's channel. He said he was raised in a Christian home, became an atheist sometime around high school. So he arrived in college, was studying biology. He was already an atheist before freshman year. And first day of one of his classes, the professor said, well, I know some of you could be Christians, but here we're going to teach you the truth. You believe what you want. Something condescending like that. He said he didn't like that, but, he was already an atheist. He was willing to, he was just going to move forward with it. By his 4th year in school, he was studying the cell membrane, and he said, everything my professor said that this could evolve, he said, no, it can't.
Mm-hmm.
It's too complicated. There had to be a God. 6 months later, he rededicated his life to Jesus, and he went off to seminary, got married, now defender of the faith. This is why when you study things...
YouTubes?
Huh?
Does he do YouTubes?
No, he works for William Lane Craig. And I want to give a shout out to Matt. It's great to see you.
I don't get it.
Oh, this is a great question. Is there a biology class you would recommend for someone like myself who has an IQ of about 88? I think maybe walking through it like that, and I'm trying to set up a basic class to teach. So a lot of this, Dr. Cy Gart is here.
Hi, Cy.
Hi, Cy. Thank you. We're honored. Oh my goodness, we got the heavy hitters out tonight. You got the PhDs in the side chat, Cindi. Look, see, that's your star power. Okay, so now let's just, so Hurricane Havoc, someone was saying, this is, yeah, maybe, I hope you can follow what we're doing here. So let's go back here.
There's probably internet introductory courses to molecular biology. That's what this is, right?
This is, molecular biology.
I Googled what you said about the central dogma, and it says the central dogma of molecular biology. So just...
What does it say?
Internet Google molecular biology introduction class, or molecular biology for dummies.
There you go. Um, and sometimes it's just perseverance, but this is really good. So,
And it really helps to be able to ask questions, Sal.
okay. So, like, if you want DNA to make an M, okay, I'll let you read that, Cindy.
Yeah, you told me to read it, so I'm reading it. It's actually kind of interesting. The central dogma of molecular biology states that genetic information encoded in DNA is transcribed to mRNA, which means messenger RNA. I remember that, by RNA polymerase. And mRNA is translated to protein by ribosomes. Is that the sugars? No, those are
No.
ribose. Yeah, it's a similar
Ribosome, they have similar sounding names. A ribosome is a particular big machine. Oh, by the way, Dr. Gart here. Okay, let me introduce. Do you know Dr. Gart? Dr. Sygart?
I saw him on your show, and I watched a couple of his YouTubes.
There you go. Sygart was a professor at my school, my graduate school. So I'm honored that he's coming here to visit. He says, if you go to Faithful Science, SYENCE, because that's Sci, I have 3 videos introducing molecular biology, and there are many others. I'm going to leave this up. Okay, so there you go,
Yeah.
Hurricane Havoc, Faithful Science, and he has videos. So there you go.
Very good. I want to finish just one more sentence because this is what I found interesting. In a living cell, DNA exists as individual molecules from which gene expression regulation originates. So basically, it's chemicals. DNA is chemicals.
Yes. But it can work as, so
My
this
dog
is why
is
we have to be, I'm sorry.
My dog is crying. Just a moment. Sorry.
Okay, we'll wait. Sai, it's great to see you. Mats is here. And Sai, so I'm just going to give a greetings to Dr. Sai. Sai, if you'd ever like to do a journal club, there are some interesting papers just on basic, kind of the latest in biology, where not creation evolution per se, but just kind of understand, just being abreast with the field. If you'd like to do a reading with me, I would be very honored, and maybe you can explain some of the terms. If you're interested, and I'll send you an email. I know that we live probably only less than an hour away from each other. God willing, someday we'll meet. So Cindy's taking care of her dog.
I can hear you, Sal.
Okay. Well, we have to refer to the diagram when you get back. So,
Okay.
so
Speaking of protein, I need to eat my chicken. So I'm going to eat. Go ahead.
okay. All
How
right.
many
So,
amino acids are in chicken?
so we'll go back to this. Let me get to this diagram here. So if you have an M for methionine,
It's AGT, I believe.
AT, remember. So how about F for phenylalanine? Now they generally correspond to phonetically, but they run out of letters every now and then because P is used for proline. So they don't have really something for pH, so they use an F for phenylalanine. And so let's look at how to code phenylalanine. So that would be PHE. So if you have TTT or TTC, you can make phenylalanine. So there's not a one-for-one correspondence. It's what they call degeneracy. So I'll show you what that means. There are multiple ways. So let's look at, let's see, valine. See, there are 4 ways you can make valine.
Well, and look at lutein. There's 6.
Leucine, yes.
Leucine, yeah.
All right. So now there's all this machinery that can construct. You can see this translation process is not. It can't be trivial. I'm trying to do this. I wanted to. The reason it's so hard to engineer stuff at the molecular level. Try to build a machine that can actually do this, that can read one molecule, translate it to another. As we've tried to build alternate genetic codes for medical applications, George Church has done this. It's not trivial to re-engineer the translation system of the cell.
Do you have a picture of some of these things, of the molecules?
Yes.
I'm just realizing that not only is it that for each of those letters, the M and the F, it's 3, I believe they're called nucleotides, the ACTG.
Yes.
And that each of those is got like oxygen, carbon, hydrogen. It's a molecule. So each of those letters is representing quadrillions of information. Do you have a picture of the molecule?
Yeah, we showed it earlier. Here you go. Okay, so the DNA molecule has this architecture.
And
so I'll show you the adenine.
That's only what carries the. That's not the actual.
So adenine. Okay. All right. So Dr. Joel, if you'll permit me, he wants me to get back on topic, but I needed to get you spooled up on the central dogma, so you can get.
Sorry, Joel.
Dr. Joel, I had to make sure Cindi understands the difference between nucleotides and amino acids.
Okay, go ahead.
She and I had reviewed this before, and so Dr. Joel's a professor of biology, so he's very patient for students.
Well, and you have a dual goal here, so go ahead.
Okay, so this is this. I think that's the nucleobase adenine there. I'm not a biochemist. Okay, are you still there, Cindi?
Well, but I was saying not just the adenine, but the phenyl. What is that? PHE.
Phenylalanine. Okay, phenylalanine is an amino acid. Okay, so you have the DNA are the nucleotides. Go back to the dogma here.
I just wanted a molecular picture of like lutein and phenylalanine.
Okay, I'll show you the pictures.
This makes it look a little bit simple, but it's really not.
Right, because we are.
So proteins are these huge molecules, is what you're saying.
Yes, that's why they call them macromolecules. So let me show you a picture of that. So this is the phenylalanine molecule, L-phenylalanine right here. Let me just bring this up. That's the phenylalanine. But now let me show you, like, say, topoisomerase molecule.
Is that one of the proteins? Topoisomerase
is a protein.
What code is that for? What code is it? Yeah, I've seen topoisomerase. I know what you're talking about. It's those scissor things.
Right. Okay, so that's I'm trying to look for a molecular diagram. Most do not have molecular diagrams because it's so. Here's some quasi-molecular diagram of the topoisomerase. And rich people wouldn't post these tiny pictures here. You could start to see the individual chemical groups here, but that's such a terrible picture.
So it's a machine. The yellow is the one side of the scissor. The blue is the other side of the scissor. The scissor opens and closes. It's a cutter. It's a cutter. It's a machine.
It's a machine. It will detect a tangle. Do you remember what it does? It detects a tangle, It cuts it, it untangles, and then reconnects.
Way more than scissor.
It's way more than scissors. Do you remember the talk of Joe DeWeese that you attended? Do you remember? Where they dissed you? Yeah, you remember. Okay.
I had forgotten that it detected the tangle.
Something
but I
helps
do
it detect the
remember
tangle
being
and cut.
stunned about putting it back together, because when I built my cabin, we saw the cable, the electric wires that go from the power company into the house. And this cable has all these other wires inside of it. And that's like what it has to put back together. You don't just
Yes.
stick one, it's not like that. It's like this, and each point has to match it's yeah.
Okay. So this actually is getting to Sai's point. I mean, not Sai. I'm sorry, Sai. Dr. Joel's point. What is the point of what I'm saying? So we have things like endonucleases and all, but let's, you cut out on me, Cindi.
I'm here.
Okay. All right. So we have things like, we have things that can cut, but topoisomerase specifically is designed to cut, untangle, and reconnect. Cut, untangle, reconnect. If you don't have that,
detect, cut,
detect,
untangle,
cut, reconnect. There may be another machine that helps it detect. I actually asked Joe DeWeese, and you saw Joe DeWeese, and how does it detect the tangle? He said, we don't know yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it has to sense the tangle, cut the tangled region, untangle it, reconnect. So detect, cut, untangle, reconnect. What happens if you just have a detector? Nothing's going to happen. What if you just have something that cuts? It's going to shred the genome if it doesn't reconnect it. Shred, dead. Or what if you have something that just reconnects, but it doesn't have the cutting phase or untangling phase or detection phase? It doesn't make sense to have this as a system if the major features are not there. And we know that when we disrupt topoisomerase functioning, the cell dies.
That's why you're using it to detect or to try and cure cancer.
Chemotherapies. Yeah, you're actually trying to kill cancers. You cure it by killing it. Unfortunately, we kill a lot of healthy cells in the process, and sometimes, sadly, it induces other cancers. But this is life critical. So I say, what's the point of having a half-formed system? I mean, that's a legitimate question. And Dr. DeWeese said there are times he's knocked out a single amino acid in the topoisomerase. And unfortunately, in my slideshow, I don't have the topoisomerase spelling handy. But it's big. It's like 1,500 amino acids. There are regions in there where if you knock out one amino acid, the whole thing's dead.
1 out of 1,500.
Yes. 1 out of 15. There's some parts that are pliable, so to speak. You could probably tolerate the pain. But there are other parts of that where one amino acid's the thing's gone. I'm pretty sure it's probably connected to the magnesium binding areas. And this thing has a lot of machines to it. I wish I could bring that up. So what is my argument? If you have a protein orchard, so let me cut to the chase. If we have a protein orchard of the major protein families, and we examine some of them, some families, maybe you can come from a small sequence and evolve it, but a lot of them, like the topoisomerase, it just doesn't make sense. So it all comes fully formed. We know from math, and people know that I'm a student of math. This is like trying to get a password. So if you have a 1,500 amino acid topoisomerase, let's say you need to get 100 amino acids just right. That's pretty reasonable, 10%. And there are studies that can back that up. But I mean, just as a rule, just as a rough order of approximation, you need to get 100 right from the bat. And it doesn't have any, if it's a major protein family, you can't count on prior ancestors that look about like it. Even if you did, you'd still have to modify enough of them to get this thing to work. But you may have only one shot.
Well, and it's not just getting 100 right. They have to be in the right order, just like if you're doing a combination lock.
Yes. So going back to this diagram, it would be easier if they had a common ancestor that you could modify and it could make all the proteins. That wouldn't be so bad. But if these have to come out of nowhere suddenly, fully formed, at least functional enough, because, okay, so going back to my letter, let's go back to my letter. Let me finish off my letter now that you saw the topoisomerase. I said, the problem is that there is no gradual descent with modification of an arbitrary protein DNA sequence into the would-be ancestral protein gene sequence that becomes the founding ancestor of the protein family, like those highlighted in our debate. So all I'm saying, and I could have been more efficient with my words, maybe that wasn't the best choice of words. If we're going to get this topoisomerase here, you're not going to start off with an arbitrary sequence and then gradually modify it to be a topoisomerase. That's just not going to work.
I just realized that topoisomerase is one of those proteins on your diagram. Put up that orchard again.
Okay. So I'm going to point out something. There is a weakness here in what Dr. Joel is saying, and I'm going to point that out. So what did you want to say?
It's
Cindi?
the fourth one. It's the fourth one. That's topoisomerase, the red and blue.
Right.
Those are scissors. And basically, Sal, I know you hate this word, and it's not an argument you like to use, but you're saying it's irreducibly complex. It has to be all together.
Yes.
It can't
and
be
it's
mentally.
Right. All or nothing. I like all or nothing.
Yes.
All or nothing. You don't confuse people. If you say all or nothing, they know what you mean. It's all or nothing.
I agree.
So Dr. Joel rightly points out
incrementally evolved.
Right. Now he's saying, topoisomerase, multiple domains, and other ones do different jobs. Proteins don't have to appear de novo. They can combine pieces of other proteins with functions already and thus modified. That is a supposition, they call promiscuous domains. It is not verified that this is really that feasible, because you have to cut out the domain in the right spot to begin with. What if you cut off something that's a piece of the domain? I mean, it's not like DNA in a translocation process that's going to identify where that domain is and just snip out that domain and say, oh, this is the right frame. I'm going to cut that out and put that here. And this is the right frame. I'm going to cut that out and put that there. That's phylogenetic reasoning. That's not science. That's phylogenetic circular non sequitur reasoning.
So
that's why I have a problem.
Sorry.
So what Dr. Joel is saying, there might be other proteins out there. You could just snip a piece here, snip a piece there, and stitch it together. And I'm saying, unless it's a controlled processes where you're identifying the domain, and I've been trying to tell this, and my professor wrote a paper, domain promiscuity in eukaryotes, and he said, we don't really know how this happens. I'm just like, yeah, that's a really big problem, particularly if you don't have a lot of exons like you do in prokaryotes. How are you going to get all this domain shuffling? It's not like you have a machine that's going to say, oh, here's a domain, let me just snip this out, and here's another domain, here's another piece, let me snip this out. This is like if you had a wooden kind of, hypothetically a wooden machine, and you just took a random chainsaw and just started hacking and say, now you're going to rebuild something from all these pieces. It's not like
you
I could
have a functional system that way.
Yeah. Okay, I'll give you the best evidence this doesn't work very well. We had these radiation labs where we were subjecting the machines to radiate. I mean, not the the cells, but they had machines, these protein machines. But really, the DNA would be randomly damaged, and they thought for a while that we were going to make all of this. If we just increase the mutation rate, we'd be able to generate more functional machines. It was a disaster. They did it with plants. Paleologo specifically called me out. He said, if I could take this, would it actually be more parsimonious for all proteins to evolve from a common structure than for them to have separate origins? That is exact. I don't know whether it's parsimonious or not. It's just not feasible mechanically, and that's what we're discussing here. So
we see.
It's for the same, and Peter and I actually, this is great. We actually, Dr. Joel, I do understand the mechanisms. Now, sometimes they do overlap with exons, but you can't just take a domain. You just have a stretch of DNA. How does the DNA know that this is going to code for a domain?
So is he trying to say that
you could just randomly grab things and it's going to put together these? It doesn't work that way. How many trials are you going to make before you actually identify, you stitch together domains? I'm sorry, I have to strenuously disagree here. There are a lot of cancer cells that have, even when you do have identified domains, if you put them in the wrong order, you end up with a disaster. And there are cancer cells that have these shuffled domains. It's not very pretty.
So I think what he's saying is like the elements we were talking about, the detector, the cutter, the thing that puts them back together. He's saying that they can be like, they can go other places or come from other places because, I need a cutter.
Why don't I read? That's what he's saying. And I'm just gonna have to domain promiscuity. And I'll just read this. Evolution of domain promiscuity in eukaryotes. So he's describing here what Dr. Joel is talking about. And and there's a section in this paper, it talks about, well, we really don't know how it's able to do this. So there is a paper. This is where I was learning about this. And it talks about how, it's not easy. That this is you can randomly shuffle domains and you're going to get something functional. And especially if you have only one shot at it. Try building it. The other thing is, do they have any experiments? That's what I'm going to say. Do you have an experiment where you have an organism without a topoisomerase and it's going to spontaneously make one? Does anyone calculate the odds? We know this is remote. You can't just assert that it's going to happen. That's not science. Sir, something's dead doesn't have natural selection. You can't. You're assuming there's no calculation for the probability it's going to be selected for in individual parts or the whole. So I know that Dr. Joel here really believes in that, and we can argue that. But this is basically my argument. So I think, to be fair to Dr. Joel, you're hearing from Dr. Joel, who's a Christian creationist. He's a Christian evolutionary creationist. So I'm glad you're hearing the other side. He's saying that I'm wrong about this and that I'm missing it. And of course, I'm going to argue with him that I'm not. So in fairness to you, you need, I want you to know that there are Christians that will disagree with me on this, but he's not a creationist. Okay. So, I'm just, I'm going to just point that out. I'm just going to disagree. Well, but the thing is, are you convinced with his argument? Or do you think, when you see the complexity of the topoisomerase, do you think it can evolve the way Aron is describing? which we really never described anyway. That's the real thing that I'm trying to say. If you see this, you have the opportunity to decide whether they've proven their point or not. I don't think they have. I think they failed. I would say, in terms of the science, I don't think it's up to standard to make any assertions. I mean, they're pretty generous assertions, not really backed up with empirical evidence or theory, just kind of hand waves, and that doesn't count for me as science. It will count for me as a faith statement, but not as an empirical science statement. They can believe it. I don't. So go ahead, speak, please. Speak your mind.
Are you talking to me, babe, or Joel?
You, Cindi.
I was just going to say, and I think
You're
you
off
actually,
camera, by the way. I can't see you.
it's okay because I'm eating. You guys don't need to watch me eat. But I was just going to say, if they're saying that this protein knows that it needs a cutter and it's going to take a cutter from another location or a detector or whatever thing they think migrates, well, it wouldn't be alive unless it already had it.
That's a very good possibility. Or, I mean, there are things that are kind of at the edge of living, like these viruses, but viruses aren't really alive. That are tangled DNA. This thing called a phage, it has tangled DNA, and it, so it's speculative. There could be some cellular life form out there that may not need it. We don't, I'm not aware of it. There could be a situation where there's what they call a symbiotic relationship, but we don't have to go there. The point is, do you think they've made their case that this can evolve naturally? I don't think they have. That's just my strong feeling. They can't keep asserting this stuff. And I keep reading the peer-reviewed literature, and even just this Saturday at 7:44 a.m., I was reading something by Michael Lynch talking about certain multimeric proteins and saying they don't have a theory for this. And I'm like, you're claiming this is true, and yet you don't have a theory for it. I said, that's, you're kind of jumping the gun here.
I guess I'd like to have Joel explain what he's saying a little bit better.
Yeah.
Because
maybe you can invite him on your channel.
I've been told that I should.
So Dr. Sa here says, we don't know the origin of proteins and how they began to be made by ribosomes through the code, but it is possible the proteins were more or less random. In a non-integrated system, I mean, you could have polypeptides that are random. They may be kind of, from my understanding, and I wish Dr. James Carter were here, it's very hard to maintain that alpha peptide polymerization throughout because a lot of the experiments didn't show that regularity. You ended up having very short polymers. The other thing is, at the point we have a translation system, that example of radiation hitting, where we are trying to induce mutations, most of them are damaging, not creative. So that's the evidence I would put forward, that randomization just makes very uncoordinated things. It takes a lot of foresight to be able to make. That's why I like the topoisomerase. It corresponds to a lot of the way we can understand things, because we can make allegories to everyday life. So
the other thing interesting about the topoisomerase is it's involved in the transcription process. So when the DNA is unwinding, that's when it gets tangled up. And so it wouldn't be able to transcribe without the topoisomerase.
okay, so now why don't we move on to another protein in the orchard?
No, that's
So
the other
Dr. Joel says there are so many unknowns that calculating the odds for creation or evolution in the case of cord genes is about guessing. Better to look at recent proteins if you want to understand possible changes. My point is the evolutionists are making faith statements that it's highly probable. They're not even attempting to calculate the odds. I'm showing that this is remote. We have experimental evidence. We have theoretical reasons to doubt that it is highly likely a priori. A priori. And they're going to say it happens naturally. I have to contest that. Just like the origin of life, they'll just say, well, we're here. It must not have been a miracle. And I say that's faulty reasoning, because if we found somewhere where we had 500 fair coins and they're all heads, yeah, 100% sure that it is all heads, but the chances of that happening, that event happening from a random process, is
zero.
Practically zero. Yeah, it's binomial distribution. We can apply similar lines of reasoning to a priori probabilities of first the origin of life, the origin of eukaryotes, origin of major protein families. And my issue is that they haven't even done this. And they'll say, what about selection? And I'll say, okay, why don't you factor in selection? What's the likelihood selection's going to work? Because they keep assuming that there is a probability whether selection is going to work or not. One of the basic probabilities is that the organism even going to be alive if that protein's missing.
Well, honey, you said 500 coins, but the topoisomerase you said had 1,500.
1,500 amino acids, and it's not just heads or tails. It's 20 possibilities at each position. So this is not like a coin that has heads or tails. It's like a die that has 20 positions, 20 faces. So this is not trivial. And so let's just say not all 1,500. Let's just say 150 just have to be just right. That's a little more reasonable. But even then, the odds are just, it kind of boggles the mind. And I'll do a James Tour thing and said, I'll give you that. I'll give you all those domains. Just randomly shuffle them. What are your chances that it's going to assemble into a topoisomerase? And you might have only one shot.
And where are the other products?
Yeah.
If you have so many chances, that means, and you're only going to have one good one out of, where are all the other ones that weren't productive?
Well, what we see, that's why they no longer do this. But early on, we thought we could just throw radiation at things, and we figured, oh, we just accelerate the mutation process. I mean, this is a while ago, before, maybe we really understood cancers and stuff. And they would just be throwing radiation at it, and it's changing the DNA, and they're getting disasters. And that was pretty sobering. But now that we know kind of like how delicate these machines are, they have to be arranged in a certain way, just like machines in the human world. The connections have to be there. And I haven't even gotten to the best parts here. So the topoisomerase, let me see if I have it. And we can go to other things. For it to be functional, it's two halves just like a scissor. Do you remember this diagram here where the two parts have to be shaped together and the charge distributions have to align so that the positive and negative help it. So you have to get the spelling to get the shape. The spelling controls the shape. There's some more things to it, but the spelling controls the shape. The spelling also controls what charge distributions you have. So you have to shape it right, get the charge distributions right, so that they'll come together. So in the case of the topoisomerase, you have the gene for the topoisomerase, 1,500, they'll make 1,500 amino acid polypeptide. That's the slightly better term. You can call it a protein, but the polypeptide, you have to have those two pieces. And then they have to have complementary shapes and charges. And I did an examination of this. And let me see, protein PISA. I took the X-ray crystallography data from the protein data bank for topoisomerase. I put it in this tool called PISA. And what I found is, and it's not evident from the diagram here. Let's see if I could get a bigger picture of the topo. See if I could find a bigger topo picture here. There are actually 60 connection points, 60 to make this work. It has to be not only the right position, it has to have what they call the right affinity. So to generate the right affinity, it's just like tape. You have some adhesives that are very strong, like you have strong duct tape being kind of a stronger tape, painter's tape, not quite so strong, masking tape in between, and then you have Post-it tape, different levels of adhesive. So think of the word affinity kind of like analogous to how strong the adhesive is. It can't be too much or too little. It has to be just right. So these are the constraints on the protein that if it is what they call multimeric, meaning multiple parts, it has to be shaped right, the complementary shape, the complementary charge distribution, and the proper affinity. And that's just to get the geometry right. We're not even talking about it even functioning.
And this is one of billions of items inside every cell in our body.
Let's reduce that number. There are billions. Otangelo said there are billions of proteins in a cell. That's true, but most of them are nearly identical copies of each other. So there are actually, like, let's say in a human, the figures that I recall are roughly 20,000 different classes, which means we have 20,000 genes, and they'll make billions and billions of proteins. But they fall into these 20,000 categories because they're 20,000 genes.
And this cell division happens every 3 seconds.
I don't know the number, but I'll tell you, you know how many chemical reactions you have in your body every second? Something like in the quadrillion range. Quadrillion.
Yeah, I got that number from Francis Collins.
Yeah, it's a lot.
I could be right.
Right.
Remembering
but yeah, I don't know how many major protein families there are. I don't think people ever really care about looking for that number because it's hard to do the categorizations. But you can get a rough feel for the difficulty right here. So we're just focusing on the topoisomerase, but now I got to tell you something else. In addition to this, particularly for a protein like this is the potassium ion channel. So you'll see in our emails with Aron Raw, and we have 15 minutes to go. Because then you have to pick up Joanna. Just reminding you.
Thank you.
So you see this potassium ion channel? And because of I'd have to roll the dice, so to speak, whether YouTube would let me show you the potassium ion channel. They've let me before without
What's
cutting
wrong
off.
with it?
No, some will release the copyright. It's like they're the copyright owner, but you're allowed to use it. So I might show it to you, but what I want to show you is the translocation. Let me see if I could show you the translocation process. Do I have? There's a because I pointed this out in the debate. Translocation process. Translocon. Okay, translocon. There have to be codes to enable the translocon process. Okay. Let me see if I could I'm just going to show this process here because this is how hard it is to make a transmembrane protein. This is another one of the major protein families. Let me just get through this about this ad.
Membrane protein. That
I'll
means
show you what that is.
that means a protein that goes across the membrane barrier.
Yes. So, in the eukaryote, we have numerous membranes. So, let's show a eukaryotic cell here. So you remember the eukaryotic cell, and I'm just going to show it to you here.
This is the ports, the cell membrane ports. The
there's so many ports and things, it's unbelievable. Oops, hang on. I messed something up here. 1 second. You're getting close. So we do have here, there are all these little ports here. It says like nuclear pore, right?
Okay, so that's the nuclear membrane.
Right.
So you're talking about that goes from inside the nucleus to outside the nucleus, and it has to go through a gateway.
Right. But there are other kinds of holes, like the potassium ion channel. And you can have a potassium ion channel here or other kinds of things. So the reason it's called transmembrane, this is made of lipids. So fats are a class of lipids. There are other things that are larger than just fats that are lipids. So you have this lipid layer, and then the protein has to be inserted in it, a transmembrane protein. So, here, you have the word membrane right here, and something has to be inserted there. Now, there are also other parts here that have membranes, very similar chemistry, and proteins get inserted there.
So again, this is a cell.
This is a cell.
A microscopic cell that we can't even see has things inside of it that are even smaller, that are like a city.
Yes. In fact, that was Michael Denton's description. This is like a city with many factories and addresses. I mean, you have to get parts, the chemical parts shuttled, the molecules shuttled from one factory to another.
And that's the difference between a living thing and an inanimate object, is it has cells and it has DNA.
Yes.
And how do you go from no cells, no DNA to bam, alive with cells?
Right. And so even when you had the first cell, each cell has different architectures. Do you remember the two major ones?
No.
Prokaryote and
eukaryote are cell types?
They are
I forgot about that. You're right. One has the membrane around the nucleus and one does not.
Right. So that's the next most difficult step. After the origin of life, it's the emergence of eukaryotes because they are so much more complex than a prokaryote. And guess where the orchard comes in? You have all these new proteins that have to be there to make this feasible. And I was showing diagrams of this. I said the first thing you're going to have to deal with is like chromatin. You have histones and all. And then you have all the machinery that has to implement the histone code. And we showed a diagram of that in our debate. No one was really
saying about between a prokaryote and a eukaryote?
The difference there are so many proteins and they're very complicated. And a lot of them have to be there.
Right.
And I talked about
did Aron actually concede that the relationship between prokaryote and eukaryote is not ancestral?
Yeah. He said it's not really evolution. I said, okay, I've heard that somewhere before. It's like, okay, just redefine it so that evolution can continue to work.
So
just like
that's the second time he conceded that there is not a universal common ancestor.
I don't know what they say anymore, honest. Yeah. I don't care. That's why I want to focus on complexity. This is the problem that the protein orchard presents. They're first the origin of life, and that's outside of evolution. But then eukaryotic evolution is another level. Now he's trying to say that's not really evolution. Some people say that, like, yeah, whatever. But then
We would agree. We would agree. It wasn't evolution that created the eukaryote from a prokaryote. We would agree that didn't happen.
Well, the best agreement we got, and I know this is supposed to be a family-friendly channel.
Don't do it, Sal.
Okay, I know this is
Okay, and so cells don't either.
There. Proteins do not have an effing common ancestor. Aron Ra. You heard it from the man himself. Okay.
Cells don't either. A prokaryote and a eukaryote don't have a common ancestor either. He conceded that.
You know,
right? That's huge. That's too big.
You can assume it, but you'd need miracles. And I was critiquing a paper in my second installment of this. I said, there's so many problems because they'll say a eukaryote came from a prokaryote that was an archaea. But I said, that's still problematic because the eukaryote has ester and a different chirality in their lipids. This is like non-trivial. So a eukaryote has features that are bacterial and features that are archaeal. And this makes it really hard to argue for common ancestry without some sort of miracles. So
we have all kinds of other stuff like the histones or something in the.
Yeah, histones. I was trying to talk. I showed this diagram of double-stranded break repair in our debate. And so a lot of times the diagrams I was showing, I said, I know no one's going to double-stranded break repair chromatin remodeling. And I showed this picture for I just flashed it on the screen briefly, and I said, yeah, I know the reactions. They're not going to be interested at all. But I'll show you all I'll show you what the protein orchard would be, partly. What would be needed to make a eukaryotic cell from a prokaryote, or let's say something that didn't have chromatin. So I'm just going to show you this orchard here. Let me put this like that. I'll do it this way. Do you see the black lines here? That's the DNA. And these are histone proteins. So that's the first problem. They're not really good prokaryotic things that could be histones. So there has to be a mechanism that winds it into these spools. So in eukaryotes, the DNA is wound into spools called nucleosomes. The spool is called a nucleosome. The actual thing that's inside the spool is a histone. So histone's kind of like, so if you look at the thread as a like the DNA, and a physical cylinder as like the histone. So together that forms a spool. And so you have these nucleosomes, but it's really complicated. In case the DNA breaks, there has to be all this machinery that's going to put it together. Because the way it repairs this cut, this is like non-trivial. And you need all of this machinery to get this to put it back together. And when it's I mean, to be able to do, you hear the word gene transcription. So what's transcription? DNA transcribed to RNA. To do gene transcription, you have to be shuffling all of these little spools around. That's called chromatin remodeling. I mean, that just does not happen randomly. You need a set of proteins to help shepherd all this chromatin remodeling. And it's really even more amazing in case there's an accident and the DNA gets broken It has to be repaired. It has to recruit all of these new pieces. And that's, again, I could go back to that protein orchard picture. If I wanted to add more, okay, so I only had what, 5? For the eukaryotic transition, I could add a lot of these. And I'd say, where did those come from? I mean, did you have kind of a random variation? And how's it going to put this together? One of the problems is if you have a double-stranded break repair and your chromatin remodeling system isn't working, this thing's dead, eventually going to die, because breaks happen periodically, and if there's no mechanism to repair it, the cell's pretty much dead.
I remember where I heard this idea about importing a needed part from somewhere else. It was Professor Dave and James Tour's rebut of Professor Dave. That it's a 9-hour video on James Tour's channel, and it's titled about abiogenesis, but it talks about this. It's stunning. I mean, it's so disappointing and upsetting that someone like Professor Dave basically says so much nonsense, and it's got what, 300,000 subscribers.
Okay. Wow. So I'd like to address Paleologos' question, and I encourage you to visit his channel. So he asked, wouldn't you say that DNA wasn't coiled into chromosomes yet at that point? Can someone knock off, one of the mods, please get the invitation to a dating site, best adult dating site. Can you get rid of that bot, please? Thanks. So back to Peter's question here. Peter was asking, would you say that DNA wasn't coiled into chromosomes yet at that point? Okay, in a prokaryote, except maybe some archaea, we don't know that it got coiled. And it's not just a matter of coiling, because to be able to do gene transcription, to be able to do everything, you have to be able to uncoil the spools. This is like non-trivial. And so when you get to the histone code, it's even more complex than that. Very hard to get into the histone code in this short space, because we have 1 minute left. Cindi, do you have some parting words? Maybe we can reconvene, and I'll just interact with the people in the side chat and finish out, because you have to pick up Joanna so she's not left hanging.
Yes. Just, this gives a new definition to the word complexity.
Yes.
All the parts that have to be there. And this is just the unseen parts that we can't see without a microscope. That doesn't even count, like a human needs all of our parts.
Yes, exactly. So remember, I said the reason I focus on this and I'm more emphatic was what happened to Matt Bilyeu. He started to see this. He was an atheist. You know, he left the faith, went to college, was already an atheist. But by 4th year, he started to study this. He said, "Now, this is not an accident. This is very powerful." So why don't you pick up, Joanna? We can reconvene another day on this and just kind of.
Just one other thing about
Sure.
what we were both just saying. It's way beyond 500 coins being all heads.
Way beyond. Way beyond.
It's not a random process.
No. And they'll say natural selection, and I'll say, prove it. Prove that your selection's going to work. What's the probability? You can't just assume natural selection. You can't assume natural selection is 100% going to be effective. We know that from population genetics, population dynamics, which I've studied, published on. We also know it experimentally.
Not only that, but it's a random process.
Yeah, well, who knows what's going to be selected? It's worse. No, it's actually worse, because we know under high selection pressure, genes are lost. This is known now. There's gene loss under high stress. You trade versatility for specialization. And so we know that under stress environments, metabolically, It's like being a hitchhiker. I mean, not hitchhiker, a hiker. I'm sorry, hiker. You have a lot of equipment that'll make it versatile for you in all sorts of environment, but do you really want to carry all that? And so you might not put in your bag the winter clothing you really need. You know,
Right.
you're in the summer, like some of these armies that were, fighting wars, and they said, hey, it's burning hot. We're getting killed by the heat. Why do we need all these winter coats? Well, winter rolls around, it's kind of bad. You're out there in enemy territory and you're freezing to death. Happened to Napoleon, happened to the Germans, but it was short-term expedient. And so natural selection in a high-stress environment where there's competition, it tends to throw away things that are not essential for that environment. You lose versatility. So what am I saying? We now know both theoretically and experimentally natural selection under high-stress environments doesn't work like people have been advertising. It's a failing theory.
Not only that, if you're starting with a simple cell, what are you going to select from?
Yeah, you can't select, as Jackson Wheat rightly said, you can't select for non-existent alleles. I'm just like, yes, you get it.
Right. Okay, I'll go get Joanna. God bless you. Love you.
Okay, how about someday we won't do this on the main channel. We could continue this on my academic channel sometime.
Okay. And if Joel does want to go on my channel, I'm totally open for that. I had one of my commenters tell me that I should have him on.
Yeah. So there you go. So say hi to Joanna for me, and say hi to all your companions there, where you are. God bless you. Let me just say a quick prayer. Can everyone say a prayer for Cindi here? Just let's all gather together and pray for Cindi. Dear Lord, we gather together and just pray. We lift up Cindi. Just surround her with your love and protection, and we ask you rain blessing on the people that are her friends, who've kind of been her family, and help them through all their difficulties. We ask this in the blessed name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Hey, I wanted to say something about that comment from Damien, because I was thinking about it when you were talking about going from a prokaryote to a eukaryote, how you'd have to have all these things. You'd have to have how many more items in the eukaryote than the prokaryote. Well, what Damien just said about a four-legged creature getting a blowhole, I have seen it done where people compare the number of things that would have to change simultaneously for a cow to turn into a whale. And yeah, millions of years, but it doesn't, the creature wouldn't survive if he was incrementally added upon. He'd have to have not just the change from the nostril to the blowhole, but a change from the legs and the feet and the flippers and the skin type and the blubber, and tons of changes between that just defy gradualism. Gradualism just it's
And you really see the problem with the orchard.
yeah.
There's no gradualism. It's either there or it's not.
Yeah.
And remember what they said. There's no effing common answer.
Sal, they're going to make fun of you for repeating that 15 times on one broadcast.
See, the protein orchard says there's no gradualism. It's not just at the origin of life, prokaryote, eukaryote transition, and then beyond.
And so what
we
this
didn't
says,
cover some of them, like zinc fingers and collagens. So anyway,
what it says to a creationist is that since it couldn't occur gradually, it had to be instantaneous, which requires a God.
yes, that is a faith statement, but I think that's more rational than something that won't work. And if they say it will, you just need faith. I'm just like, well, you need faith. They don't want you to say that. They don't want you to point that out. I said, that's a faith statement, isn't it? You don't actually have facts to back it up.
I think they're going to say that we are arguing from incredulity, aren't they?
Right. And what do you say in response? It's an argument by contradiction, not an argument from incredulity.
Yes, it's a probabilistic argument. It's a mathematically improbable.
So if someone said a tornado can assemble a 747 out of a junkyard, is it? And you say no, is that an argument from incredulity or argument by contradiction?
Yeah.
There's a difference. So
I
they're saying,
I think they have a rebut to the 747. I don't remember what it is, but I love
natural
that.
selection.
So gradually, like first you're going to get the body, then you're going to get the engine, then you're going to get the wings, then you're going to get the steering system.
I don't know. They'll say it can be built up gradually, but it can't be. Why? Because of the protein orchard.
Okay, guys.
All right.
You.
Okay. God bless you, Cindi. I'm going to continue here. So
Okay.
I wanted to talk about the, thank you, Damien Martinez. And so now we'll talk about the histone. Okay.
I don't want to miss that.
Oh, we'll repeat it for you. Okay.
I'll listen to it later. You're right. I have to go. Okay.
Okay.
Bye.
So Peter, this is, let me see. All right, Peter, I'm going to show you something here. The histone code. Let's see if I could get a better diagram for the histone code. So I'll start off with this diagram, Peter. Oh man, I wish they would make bigger. All right, so in eukaryotes, there's the eukaryotic nucleosome. There may be some in the archaea, but in either case, it's problematic for evolution because the DNA here, there's DNA, the DNA wire is this wire here, this kind of grayish wire. Hopefully you could see that. And that spools around here. It's about 220 nucleotides long that will spool around these 8 histones. And there are 4 classes of histones, H3, H4, H2A, H2B. It got those names based on the kind of the chemical research. They were just assigning it, it was ever coming out of their test tubes. They were just labeling it. So that's how it got its names. And the histone, it kind of has this globular kind of glob section or cylindrical, whatever. I actually don't know the exact shape. And then it has this tail. And each of those amino acids are they have a specific number, obviously. And it actually, so I'll show you the histone code. So this is like ornaments. So this is the histone tail. So at the amino acid position 2, for example, you can have any of these 3. You might have any of these 3 modifications at amino acid or no modification at amino acid position 3. T is for threonine, I think. You can have this modification of phosphorylation. So here on the second amino acid, arginine 2, you can have a methylation, and then so you have then machines that can read. You have readers, writers, and erasers. And here's position 4, lysine. You can have readers, writers, and erasers. So these are the various readers that can read this. And I sort of used to know some of the names. So you have, and so this is like a computer code right here. on the cell. I mean, on the histone itself. So why is that important? The state of the chromatin is kept, we keep track of it. The cell is able to keep track of it. The histone is able to keep track of it by all these ornaments that are hanging on here. And this is a very dynamic process. So it's a very dynamic process that it's able to keep track of all this. And how does that relate to the chromatin remodeling? When I showed this picture earlier, if you have a double-stranded break, what's happening, what they're not showing is these histone tails are being modified. They're being modified all the time to keep track of all that's happening. So as the break happens, you get all these histone modifications. And then as the repair process is happening in all these machines, we're getting modifications to the nearby histones to detect the state and act accordingly. And so there are things that are reading the histone states, the histone tail states, and there's all this cross communication on the ornaments. And so this is going to be, to implement these nucleosomes is just like non-trivial. So the step going from the step going from prokaryote to eukaryote, or at least eukaryotic-like components like chromatin, this is going to be a nightmare scenario for gradual evolution, because just think how hard it is then to go from a prokaryote to eukaryote when you have DNA double-stranded break repair. You're going to have to manage all the histone codes here. All these histone codes have to be managed. These are dynamic. These ornaments are being, the methylations, the phosphorylations, the acetylations, etc., in all these different positions. They have to be managed. And they're constantly changing. And in the context, you have all these machines reading what's happening on the tails, writing as the break is repaired. And if this isn't done right, your creature dies, because breaks happen. Is that repair protein only in eukaryote? Yes. This repair system. Okay, there is break repair both in prokaryotes and eukaryotes. There is break repair in prokaryotes and eukaryotes. The way eukaryotes do double-stranded break repair, you have to orchestrate quite a number of more machines. And I'm just giving you the tip of the iceberg of all the steps. I one time saw a picture of all the steps involved. If you miss a step, goodbye DNA. So not only do you have various machines, look at all the machines involved. We don't know how many machines are involved in being able to, you have to detect the repair, you have to detect the break, you have to recruit the machines that are going to seal the break and then repair it. That's a lot. I saw one time all of the necessary machines that we had cataloged so far. It was a way bigger diagram than this. It was gigantic. And it was in the context of cancer treatments. I mean, it was a gigantic, diagram. Let's see if I could find one that talks about chromatin remodeling is a difficult, it's a big topic. So this is like, when I'm talking about the protein orchard, look at all the proteins that have to just appear just to manage histone modifications in a double-stranded break repair. You're not going to have a cell if you don't have that, because DNA breaks so frequently. I mean, when I'm dealing with this, I get diagrams like this all the time, and I'm just like, wow. Managing the double-stranded break repair. So that's why, I'm just like, that's why you have a protein orchard, and it's not just at the origin of life, all the way through the supposed evolutionary transition. So you Paleologos, you'll hear about orphan genes, taxonomically restricted genes. So you have all of this, and let me see. I'll show you one that I had to write a paper for my professor. It was assigned to all of us. Polycomb repressive complex 2. This is one of my favorite. This is absolutely one of my favorite complexes. This is the polycomb repression complex 2. This is beautiful. So I'm going to show you how difficult it is to modify a histone. So here again is the DNA, the black, that's spooled around the histone octamers. So there are 8 histones there, 2 of each class. And what's going to happen is from chromosome 12, there is a link RNA, an RNA called hot air. It's going to somehow navigate through quote unquote, Brownian motion. It's going to jump, it's going to connect to something called a SUS12 bus. And it's going to go to chromosome 2. So what happens is this link RNA, here it's designated as non-coding RNA. It's going to be expressed from chromosome 12. It's going to be shuttled by SUS12. So chromosome 12, and then this protein called SUS12 is going to grab the link RNA. And then the link RNA, as it's present there, it's going to force the assembly of all these proteins, AEBP2, AB ApoBec, something like that. This Jared2, EED, EZH2, SUS12, PCL, RBA, P4, 46, 48. These are the names of the proteins. So it's gonna go from chromosome 12. It's gonna locate the very right region of the Hox gene cluster in chromosome 2. It's going to go to a specific histone. It's going to go to, if I recall correctly, I think it's histone 3. It's going to go to histone number 3 in the right nucleosome. So it's going to find the right DNA region, the Hox cluster. It's going to find the right histone, which is histone 3. It's going to go then from histone 3, it's going to find the 27th amino acid lysine, and it's going to modify, it's going to add a methyl group. And you need this big machinery to locate and assemble. And you see this little histone tail that's going to go into the EZH2 complex. And it's going to modify, it's going to find the 27th amino acid and then change it. Why is that significant? The quality of the skin on your eyelids is different than the quality of skin on your feet. That amount of machinery is needed to affect that regulatory change so that the quality of skin on your eyelids is nice and soft versus kind of a little harder and more durable at the soles of your feet. And there are tons of these regulatory changes. And you could see this is a writing complex. You know, when we have computers, you have readers, writers, erasers. This is like non-trivial, guys. And it took John Wren a lot of work to discover this. He published in Cell. They said that was the greatest paper ever written for that journal, discovering the hot air link RNA. And why am I covering this? Do you see how complex all this has to be and how much of it has to be in place to implement a histone code? It's not just about wrapping the DNA around. You need all this computer code. And I need to point out, a computer scientist did this, found out histone code. Histone code is Turing complete. So those who study computer science, this is a paper. Chromatin computation. The histone code is, I don't want to accept all cookies, I will. The histone code is Turing complete. It is a big computational system. This is just like non-trivial. And so Peter's asking a very pointed question. I appreciate the interest here. I don't want to, I have to be careful not to ignore the other readers, but yes, some really interesting. How similar are the repair proteins of prokaryotes and eukaryotes? As far as where it does not involve chromatin, it's very, very different. At the actual DNA level, there are probably some similarities, but at the chromatin level where you have to recruit so many machines to orchestrate the DNA repair, because you have to do chromatin remodeling, which means chromatin remodeling is then adjusting the spools. You're kind of uncoiling it from the spool, or at least sliding the spool down. This is really tough. You need machines to do that. It can't happen randomly. I mean, if you think about it, just the process of uncoiling a eukaryotic chromosome and then being able to access parts, this is just incredible. So let me see if I could show chromatin. So there are higher level structures here. So maybe this is a good, this is a good diagram. Eukaryotic chromatin. You start off with a chromosome, and you could see kind of this wiry stuff here, and you have what they call they believe this to be the 700 nanometer formation, and then when you zoom in, it becomes this 300 nanometer formation, and then you get down to this chromatin fiber. And then the chromatin fiber, you get down to nucleosome, and then finally the DNA. So let's just go from right to left instead. So the DNA wraps around the histones to make these spools called nucleosomes. The nucleosomes then aggregate together to get this structure here. And so this little structure here, this fiber, this kind of chromatin fiber, then starts to go into this 300 nanometer form. So this, the way you could see it is this whole square, if you zoom out, it just ends up being this little thread. And then that little thread will start to make this thing, and that thread's even bigger, and then it ends up being here. I mean, this is just incredible. To be able to, good night. Good night, Hive Science. Managing all this is just tough. And to the extent you need new proteins, you have another thing in the orchard that just has to be there. So that orchard is huge. And the orchard is just spread out over all these creatures. And we may have all these things called orphan genes. And greetings, praise I am. Oh, I do have one slight announcement. Let me start. I wasn't able to go to translocation. Let me see if I have James Garapi here. I think I've since lost the website I wanted to show. I have a debate with a biologist, J.F. Garapi. Greetings. I have a debate on modern day debate this coming Thursday, 8 p.m. Eastern. So thank you all my supporters who came out to my last debate. It had 47,000 views. I'm excited about that. So that's my next round. Oh, here it is. I'll just show the announcement here. There you go, guys. And JF is a conservative. He's a conservative atheist. He's pro-life. I think he's from France, but he supports the conservatives here in the United States. So I respect him, and I'd be a big fan of his. I mean, there's some views he has that, I'm not too keen on, but this is going to be interesting. And someone said, I mean, is that really true? Well, that's too bad, because otherwise he has some views I like. So this would be interesting because I think of anyone, I mean, I've interacted with him before. I was in a 2x2 debate, and I really liked his personality. So even if he's a racist, okay, let's have a conversation. And I mean, the fact that he's an atheist and pro-life, I was really kind of shocked. And yeah, this should be interesting because he holds a lot of views that sound very evangelical. So, well, anyway, we'll see. So Pro Debate says, I mean by ought. Okay, all right. So maybe first impressions are misleading, but we're going to talk creation versus evolution. So thanks for visiting. So we were talking science here. So I'm just going to thank you, Damien. So just along the lines of, while I have this debate up, some of you know that there's I could be on television next year and teaching at the New Creationist Museum in Dixon, Tennessee, 4 times a year, not continuously. And I'm hoping to have some exhibits. So Cindy's still here. So she's probably listening in while she's driving. So I wanted to, I'll cover this again, but there is the thing called the translocation process, where a membrane is stitched like a sewing machine, where the transmembrane protein is stitched into the membrane like a sewing machine inserting thread. It is just staggering. And so there have to be there have to be segments, the membrane spanning segments, that have to have kind of the right class of amino acids. And there are all sorts of codes that will have to put it there. I mean, the probability that this can arise by random chance, first off, is remote. Natural selection may not work if it's life critical, like say a potassium ion channel. And then it also has to be multimeric. So maybe the next time Cindi and I get together or talk, or I have an academic channel talk, we'll look at all the constraints that are needed to make a transmembrane protein like the potassium ion channel. That was presented in our debate. They totally ignored it. And, I noticed something. If they start to ignore something, it's probably a good thing to keep throwing in their face and say, do you have an explanation for this? And they say, well, we don't know yet. And I said, so you accept it by faith it happened naturally. That's a faith statement. I really hate it when, creationists are so eager to prove creation. It's like, no, you don't have, the bar can be set lower. All you have to do is prove that the evolutionists are moving by faith statements. They're going to really resent that. But you call them out on it and say, okay, evolution, you believe it by faith. You don't actually accept it by facts. And you show all these things. And thank you, Paleologos. So I guess while Cindy's picking up Joanna, this is great. And I'm kind of running out of gas. It's already 2 hours and 31 minutes. So let me finish up the letter and, that I was writing to Aron Ra.
I'm here, hon. I'm waiting for Joanne to come out.
Oh, okay. So apologies if you're, can you see what I'm showing?
Yes, not again.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm just trying to finish this up. I wish I could show that in the museum. Okay, so I'm just saying this paragraph that we are so focused on, I said the problem is that there's no gradual descent with modification of an arbitrary protein DNA sequence into the would-be ancestral protein gene sequence that becomes the founding ancestor of a major protein family. So basically, these proteins just kind of appeared out of nowhere. You can't just take an arbitrary sequence and gradually modify it. And we talked at length about one reason it wouldn't work to make a functioning topoisomerase. It will also fail for things like potassium ion channel. And I could make the argument for anything else in the protein orchard that I had here that I was trying to show where it would fail. It would fail as an explanation. And so if we accept universal common ancestry, it would require statistical events that are indistinguishable from miracles of God. And they'll say, well, that's a faith statement. And I say, it's a faith statement on your part that it doesn't require a statistical miracle, because I just gave a lot of arguments why it's going to be difficult to evolve something like that. And all you really see this at the cellular level. So then going back, so that's what I meant. Maybe I could improve that argument. And I did mention about the stop codons. That's also going to be a problem. If you take a random, okay, so proteins have punctuation. To make a protein, you need a punctuation mark. Where does it stop? Where does it start? Where does it end in the DNA? So in the DNA, you need punctuation to say, this is where the protein starts. This is where it ends. Because remember, on a chromosome, all this DNA is connected, and there are multiple genes there. How do you have punctuation that says this is where the gene starts, where does it end? In eukaryotes, the start position is kind of hard to, we're still figuring out how the cell figures out where the gene starts. But almost invariably, it's going to start, there'll be one codon that's ATG, the methionine. It's a standard. But, there are many places on the DNA that could code for a methionine. So it's pretty difficult to figure out where it starts. But let's suppose you have a start. What you want to do is to be able to keep reading, like, say, if you have a 1500 amino acid protein, you have a punctuation mark called a stop codon. Stop codon. So you saw the genetic code. Let's see if I still have the genetic code here. Yeah, here's the genetic code. And you have this stop codon, TAG. I see a lot of TAGs and TGA stop codons. So the probability of a random DNA sequence making a stop codon, it happens 1 out of 22 times. So if you have a 1500 amino acid, if you have a stretch of DNA, it's 3 times 1500, it's 4500 nucleotides. You don't want to have any place in there that could be read as a stop codon, because otherwise it's going to code right up to that stop codon and then it terminates. So this is why it's very devastating if you have a mutation in the DNA that creates a stop codon, a premature stop codon. That means instead of coding all 1,500 amino acids, it's going to only code, what, half of those? Because the punctuation mark got accidentally inserted. This is really bad. So you have premature.
For example, if instead of a TAT or a TAG, excuse me, a TAT or a TAC, if you accidentally have a TAA or a TAG, you just stopped in the middle
Right.
of.
Right. And it's even worse than that. We have things called a frameshift mutation. Let's say you delete. This sometimes happens where in the process of replication, it doesn't copy all the DNA. It misses one letter. That's called a frameshift mutation. If you have a frameshift mutation, oh my goodness. Everything gets shifted over by one. So
Because that's 3. It grabs every 3, and so if it's missing one, then you have a 2 instead of a 3, and so it grabs the first one off of the next one.
right, I have a document that shows the effect,
Wow.
and it's gone. It's randomized. It's going to introduce stop codons. It's going to change all that. So one nucleotide can just blow all that away if you have a deletion, and conversely, an insertion can also damage this. We have diseases like Tay-Sachs. I think it's Tay-Sachs disease. Tay-Sachs disease can be induced by a frameshift mutation. There are a lot of diseases. There are a few diseases that are induced by frameshift mutations. So I'm showing what I'm trying to say is, guys, you keep saying random mutation. Most of this is going to be bad. And I'm showing you all the reasons it's going to be bad. What examples do they have that this is going to be good and it's going to be preserved? They have a very small number that are a functional, improvement. And those are pretty trivial compared to the machines that I'm describing, like say a potassium ion channel. This doesn't look good. And again, that complexity, that's why you have a protein orchard. The protein orchard is there because for a lot of the major protein families, so much has to be there all at once. That's the real thing of the protein orchard. But it does feel kind of uncomfortable that if you're going to invoke common ancestry, how do you have all these independent origins of proteins? It's not very reassuring that the theory's on a good footing from a mechanistic standpoint.
Sal,
Yes.
my display in the Science Center says some kind of a 90% of all mutations are problematic. Is that about how it goes? And so we are evolving from a single cell to a complicated living organism based on something that's happened 10%
Oh,
of the time.
Cindi, I'm afraid you're cutting out. Is there a way you can hold your phone so we can hear you better?
How's that?
You almost got it.
How's that?
It's light, and then for one moment it was nice and loud.
Oh, I know what it is. I have my Bluetooth on. Hold on.
Okay, is that better?
Oh, yes.
Okay. In my I've heard that it's like 90% of all mutations are problematic. And so they're trying to go from a single cell to a complicated trillion cell organism using something that only happens 10% of the time because 90% of those mutations are problematic.
It could be worse than that.
Yeah, I think it was
It could be
a high
at best it's neutral. At worst, it's problematic, particularly for certain classes of multimeric proteins. One of them being the potassium ion channel, which was in our one of the slides in the protein orchard. And Dr. Chris, who's a neuroscientist, is very familiar with potassium ion channels. I said, why don't you explain how it originated? He punted. And to originate the potassium ion channel, why don't I show what the potassium ion channel is? See if I can run it. I think I can. It's only a few minutes long. It's likely, can't say absolutely, without a potassium ion channel, life wouldn't exist. And in the email chain with you, Dr. Chris, and Aron Ra, I gave papers that showed that. So the mystery is, why do we have potassium ion channels? And how did they evolve? So let me see if I could show how a potassium ion channel works. Let me see. There used to be a beautiful picture of this. Did they remove it? Let me make sure. Okay, I'm going to play this, and hopefully YouTube will permit me to get it through, because they have before. So let me see. I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to present as a screen share that is a Chrome tab. Where does it say potassium ion channel? This is, wish they wouldn't do this to me. Hang on, let me click here. Hang on, I know what I need to do here. I need to get this up. Of course, I get all these obnoxious advertisements. Okay, I'm going to look again. Hang on. Let me see. All right, I'm going to show this YouTube video.
Protein in the plasma membrane. The bacterial potassium channel is a multi-pass transmembrane protein in the plasma membrane. It is built from 4 identical subunits that are arranged symmetrically. A pore in the center of the protein allows selective passage of potassium ions across the membrane. 4 rigid protein loops, one contributes.
Okay, I'm going to pause here. It says 4 identical subunits. This is what, when we're referring to a multimeric protein, it has 4 identical parts that have to come together and connect. So do you remember with the importance of the shape to make complementary shapes and you have charge distributions that enable it to connect? That's very important.
What's the name of that word when you're
Potassium.
talking about the stickiness of the tape?
Affinity.
Yeah.
Affinity. So you need a complementary shape, complementary charge distributions, and affinity, the correct affinity, the stickiness. And in fact, I read a paper recently, they specifically used the word adhesive.
Now, wait a minute. I didn't realize there were 3. Charge, affinity, and shape.
Right. Shape is I'd say shape is the most important. So the spelling controls the shape and also the charge distribution. In the shape also, then you have to have just the right, I'm not quite sure, but you have to have the right affinity. So you don't want the charges to hold too tight or too weakly. It has to be just right, because there's lots of assembly and disassembly of things.
Goldilocks syndrome.
Well, I mean, you think about it. Okay, so like you have like your faucets. What if it, you don't want it to be leaky, right? But you want to be able to turn the handles, right? So there are a lot of things where you want a tight fit, but not too tight, because if all the things that you rotate and knobs or whatever, and it's too tight, that's not, you're not going to be able to operate. The same is true for protein parts.
It's
Now,
just stunning that 3 different things have to be working.
Yes.
I mean, it just adds to the, sorry, this is not random. This is not possible in an incremental system.
Exactly. That's what I'm trying to say. I've actually posed this to biochemists. I said, do you think you could make something like a potassium ion channel if you didn't have the blueprint God already gave for us? If I just said, okay, here's the requirement. You want to pass a potassium ion through the membrane. Can you build a protein that does this? No.
It also speaks of
Intelligence.
the mind-boggling genius of God, which means
Yes.
when we don't understand things like hell or death or suffering, can we say he's smarter than us?
Yes, exactly. Remember I said Matt Bilyeu, okay, a potassium ion channel's found in the membrane. Matt Bilyeu was an atheist. He started studying this his 4th year of biology. He said he came to the same conclusion that you came to. You're a creationist. He wasn't. He was a hardened atheist. He accepted evolution. He already renounced this faith in high school. Started to see this. He said, no, my professors don't explain this at all. They're wrong.
Cindi, my sweetheart. Okay,
Hi, Joanna.
Go, guys.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye. They didn't have any of your...
So this is also why I'm kind of glad to teach Cindi this. I think these are the sort of arguments that you'll see the Discovery Institute bringing. It's an old Earth creationist outfit, or old Earth intelligent design. I wouldn't say they're all creationists. A lot of them, they probably have creationist sympathies, but they believe the Earth is old. So this would mean that there would be miraculous events along the way. And there could be varieties of this too, where, Michael Behe believes in universal common ancestry, at least nominally. Stephen Meyer described himself sort of like a progressive creationist. So you have all sorts of flavors at the Discovery Institute. And you also have young Earth creationists at the Discovery Institute. But the common thread is the complexity argument, Paley's watch. And so, but now you have these protein orchards. They're just like, these things pop out here or there, where you need to have a lot of the structure in there all at once. Otherwise, it's dead. Topoisomerase is an example. Potassium ion channels, very likely example of this. I mean, it's going to be hard to evolve a potassium ion channel if it's not there, because, in fact, this is a document. They said, it's energetically difficult to maintain a high concentration of potassium above random inside the cell, and you need these potassium ion channels to help do this. And so, how does that evolve? I mean, potassium's judged to be essential, and having the right concentration essential to the cell operation. So how does this evolve before it existed? One of the theories was like, well, cells just kind of popped out in these mica sheets where you could have high potassium concentration, and then somehow the cell grew there. But then you have the problem of then, okay, how did the potassium ion channel start to come about? And they'll say, that's an origin of life theory problem. It's like, yeah, maybe, but then there are evolution papers that postulate cells that didn't have potassium ion channels that evolved them. So they don't, these are all faith statements, and all they admit that they'll never know for sure, but they can guess. And I say, well, that's a faith statement. That's not empirical science. Evolutionism at that point to me is more akin to a religion. You say I mean, you compare that to something like electromagnetic theory, which I've been covering here, where I was going through these derivations and showing you can combine Maxwell's equations with the result of Michelson-Morley that was studying oil lamps, and they predicted that the clock rate changes depending on how fast you go. That's just an incredible inference trail. And you saw how difficult the math was to make that conclusion. You don't see anything of that skill and ability in evolutionary biology. It's all hand waving. There's no calculations done that can resolve this. It's all accepted by faith and uncertainty. That's okay if you want to speculate that. Just don't, my beef with this is don't represent it as first tier science. It's not. It's more akin to religion. And I'm not the only one to say that. Michael Roos said this is like a secular religion. Anyway, so let's complete a little bit of the potassium ion channel here.
Attributed by each subunit, form a selectivity filter at the narrowest part of the pore. This structure is responsible for the channel's high degree of selectivity for potassium ions over sodium ions.
Okay. Do you see how this has to be a very, very precise fit? In fact, she uses the word, it has to be a perfect fit, like as in sub-angstroms. If you misspell this, you're not going to get, you might be lucky to get a multimeric protein, but much less one that will shape to match to allow the potassium ion to pass through here. And there plus other things that go on down here to make this possible. And this is still this is not even the end of the problems, but let's just see what it does. You'd be dead without this.
In this selectivity filter, carbonyl groups line the walls of the pore. These carbonyl groups are spaced precisely to interact with an unsolvated potassium ion.
Okay, she used the word precisely,
balancing the energy required to remove its hydrogen.
Oh wait, look, it uses here. The caption is perfect fit. I mean that's accurate. You can't. I'm trying to illustrate why this is silly to talk about gradual evolution of this. You get it a little bit wrong. At best, it's neutral. Most likely, you're not going to get it. And if it's life critical, there's no natural selection. It's just ridiculous. That's why you have this protein orchard. The protein orchard is evidence of the difficulty of evolving complex proteins. And it doesn't happen gradually. I mean, what is wrong with this reasoning here to say that I think it's unlikely? I don't find it credible. Is that unreasonable? I mean, do they have to shove it down my throat and say you just don't, we explain how it might happen, therefore you have to believe it? It's like, no, that's not being sufficiently skeptical. I think this is really hard to evolve. And it's really hard to design it from scratch if you didn't know. I mean, just go to a protein guy and say, okay, write the sequence that will make this. Here's the specification. It's going to be a potassium ion channel. Make it a whatever meric, tetrameric, whatever. You build it, however, I give you all the freedom in the world to build this the way you think it needs to be built, just so that potassium ion can pass through. Try that. It just boggles the mind that they think this can happen through a process of random mutation. And natural selection is precluded because, as I said, it's likely going to be dead if this isn't in place. You may not have the system, the population of whatever primordial precursors doesn't have a lot of chances at making this. And assuming a cell already exists, how likely is this going to be? Is it going to evolve? Because we haven't even touched the translocation process, and we'll touch on that. So let's roll the tape.
Hydration shell. Passage of a sodium ion through the channel is energetically unfavorable because the sodium is too small for optimal interaction with the carbonyl groups.
All right, I'm not an organic chemist. Dr. James would probably know that, but I believe you need to have the right amino acids in that position to present these carbonyl groups to the potassium ion channel. It has to be oriented right. So not only do you need the correct shape geometry, but you want to have all the angles of the amino acids presented in the right way so that it presents itself for optimal interaction. This is just insane, the amount of precision at this level. And this is where I have objections. I mean, do these evolutionists kind of, just writing all these phylogenetic, look at all these hierarchies that they're able to build with their phylogenetic diagrams. It's like, no, sirs, this does not explain how the sequences of the major protein families, how those features got there to begin with, because the level of precision here is just insane. The genius, and I think this is only like 1,000 residue protein polypeptide to make one of the subunits. The genius to make it so compact is amazing. So let's continue. Perfect fit. I like that. There you go. So, but what else needs to be done? I'm going to show a picture. Let me see if I could show the picture here. Okay, I like this picture here. We have part of the potassium ion channel that is on the outside of the cell. This is the part that's on the inside, and this is the part that's in the membrane. There are different kinds of amino acids that have to be different classes that are in the membrane versus the ones that are on the outside. I think these are supposed to be hydrophobic on the inside, hydrophilic on the outside, hydrophobic on the inside in the membrane. I could be getting that backward. There is, to get this to happen, you have remember I keep talking about 500 coins heads. You have a binomial distribution here. It's a similar set of reasoning that you're going to arrange it this way. It's not going to be trivial, guys. The odds of you getting this right are not trivial. From the standpoint of first geometry, now the charge distribution, the affinities, the angles. Now you have the constraint of hydrophobic versus hydrophilic. But now I'm going to show you yet another constraint. And remember, this is in a multimeric context. So back into the translocation process. Now, I don't have a great video of the translocation process at the cellular membrane level. I do have it for, like, say, for the ER, but it's a similar principle. So let's look at that. Let me stop sharing this, and I'm going to share another. Let's share Chrome tab 4. This is 12.5. Here it is.
ER is the most extensive membrane system in eukaryotic cells. Proteins transported to the Golgi apparatus, endosomes, lysosomes, and the cell surface all must first enter the ER from the cytosol. As an mRNA molecule is translated into a protein, many ribosomes bind to it, forming a polyribosome. There are two separate populations of polyribosomes in the cytosol that share the same pool of ribosomal subunits. Free ribosomes are unattached to any membrane. Membrane-bound ribosomes become riveted to the ER membrane and translate proteins that are translocated into the ER. These membrane-bound ribosomes coat the surface of the ER.
Okay, I'm pausing here. This is not going to be trivial where we have this RNA here that needs to be, that's transcribed from the DNA, and it's going to go through these ribosomes that are right there near the membrane. This is going to be the stitching process of how it's put in the membrane. And you're going to see some codes that are needed to do this right. This is not trivial, guys.
Creating regions called rough endoplasmic reticulum. Two kinds of proteins are moved from the cytosol to the ER. Water-soluble proteins completely cross the ER membrane and are released into the lumen, while transmembrane proteins only partially cross the ER and become embedded in the membrane. All these proteins are directed to the ER by a signal sequence of small hydrophobic amino acids. The signal sequence is guided to the ER membrane with a signal recognition particle, or SRP, which binds the ER signal sequence in the new protein as it emerges from the ribosome. Protein synthesis then slows down until the SRP ribosome complex binds to an SRP receptor in the ER membrane. The SRP is then released, passing the ribosome to a protein translocation channel in the ER membrane. Thus, the SRP and SRP receptor function as molecular matchmakers, connecting ribosomes that are synthesizing proteins containing ER signal sequences to available ER translocation channels. In addition to directing proteins to the ER, the signal sequence functions to open the translocation channel. The signal peptide remains bound to the channel, while the rest of the protein chain is threaded through the membrane as a large loop. Once the protein has passed through the membrane, it is released into the ER lumen, after the signal sequence has been cleaved off by a signal peptidase located on the luminal side of the ER membrane. The signal peptide is then released from the translocation channel into the membrane and rapidly degraded. It is thought that a protein serving as a plug then binds from the ER lumen to close the inactive channel. But not all proteins that enter the ER are released into the ER lumen. Some remain embedded in the ER membrane as transmembrane proteins. For clarity's sake, the membrane-bound ribosome will be omitted to illustrate the translocation of transmembrane proteins into the ER membrane.
Okay, I'm just pausing it here. Again, I said this is not the cell membrane. I'm having to use this endoplasmic reticulum because this is the best animation, but the same principles will apply, very many of them, in the cell membrane. But you could see there has to be a lot of coding and precise. I mean, you also have to have the machinery to do this insertion and then creating proteins that follow a policy where the machinery can recognize these codes. So let's just continue now.
Simplest case, that of a transmembrane protein with a single membrane spanning segment, the N-terminal signal sequence initiates translocation, just as for a soluble protein. But the transfer process is halted by an additional sequence of hydrophobic amino acids, a stop transfer sequence, further in the polypeptide chain. The stop transfer sequence is released laterally from the translocation channel and drifts into the plane of the lipid bilayer, where it forms a membrane-spanning segment that anchors the protein in the membrane. As a result, the translocated protein ends up as a transmembrane protein, inserted in the membrane with a defined orientation. In some transmembrane proteins, an internal signal sequence is used to start the protein transfer, which continues until a stop transfer sequence is reached. The two hydrophobic sequences are then released into the bilayer, where they remain anchored. In complex multipass proteins, in which many hydrophobic regions span the bilayer, additional pairs of stop and start sequences come into play. One sequence reinitiates translocation further down the polypeptide chain, and the other stops translocation and causes polypeptide release, and so on, for subsequent starts and stops. Thus, multipass membrane proteins are stitched into the lipid bilayer as they are being synthesized by a mechanism resembling a sewing machine.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why it is so hard to make a protein. Sorry about that. That is why it's so hard to make a transmembrane protein. Look at all the constraints that have to be there in the protein itself, not to mention, it has to follow the policy of all the machines later that are going to insert it. So it has to have all those translocation sequences or whatever, stop transfer, etc., and multi-pass. So to make that tetrameric, homotetrameric potassium ion channel, it has to do this 4 times, stitch it together, then make it work. And since this is life critical, I don't see that this is going to happen in small gradual steps. And this is confirmed by the protein orchard. The protein orchard is confirmation of the complexity of the major protein families, such as the ones I pictured in that diagram. And that is the argument. It affirms the complexity of making proteins. And there's not going to be, it shows there's a lack of evolutionary mechanism for the evolution of major protein families. That's the argument. There's a lack of mechanism, of a credible naturalistic mechanism, natural by meaning within expectation of chemistry, physics, probability, and population dynamics. It fails on that. And that's why neo-Darwinism is failing. People are seeing that. I read a paper a few nights ago by Eugene Koonin that says neo-Darwinism is defunct. We don't really have a synthesis theory. And just like, that's not what you'll hear in the popular press and even some textbooks, that we actually don't have a theory for mechanism. They'll say, well, there are multiple mechanisms and they're all specialized and they're all kind of spread out. It's like, that's not much of a theory. It doesn't work. And certainly we don't have one for the potassium ion channel. And so I'm not going to say that there's no naturalism there, but you have to, at this point, have to think, at least in my opinion, that you can only accept naturalism and natural mechanisms as a faith statement, because it's not looking good given what I think you're seeing there. And I'm not the only one that saw that. Matt Buell is just one person of many stories I've heard like that, where people saw the complexity at the cellular level, not at the taxonomic level. Aron Ra was arguing so much at the taxonomic level. I said, you're going to be blown away when you start looking at the cellular level, because that's where real problems are. And that's where evolutionary theory is failing. So, it's encouraging that I don't have to say things to certain students in biology. They start studying biochemistry, really hard, rigorous cell biology and stuff like this. A lot of them, start believing in God. They don't have to read creationist literature. They just have to read modern biology. You can't, it's very hard to run away from this. And the evolutionary biologists are saying, oh, I've explained this to you how it works. I'm just like, you got to be kidding. No, you haven't explained it. So thank you all. It's 3 hours now, and Cindi hung in there for 2.5 hours. And I want to be of service to her to kind of teach her a few things. And, she does ask all these questions, and it's not quite linear like I would prefer. But, hopefully I've defended what I really believe what the protein orchard represents. That for the major protein families, there is no gradual pathway to evolving them. All you have is random chance for some of this. And if that's the case, then you need miracles to make common descent possible. Because you have to evolve all these proteins out in like nowhere. So let me just tidy up. I think that covers most. And, I could keep repeating that play, insisting the complexity just with those 5. And the things I put out in the debate. I talked about prokaryote, eukaryote. So at the transmembrane level, it's bad. Nuclear pore complex, import, export, chromatin remodeling, double-stranded break repair, all these new proteins in the orchard. So, I'm going to wrap it up shortly here. And we'll just close it out with my favorite Rachmaninoff. So glory and honor to our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, who is the creator and intelligent designer of all. And I hope, I know this has been tedious, but I hope you can all, for the creationists especially, that you can feel, you can wonder as we declare the works of God, and we can wonder and praise him. God bless you all. Have a good evening.